across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello. Good afternoon. Yes, welcome to the home of common sense. I was taken slightly by surprise there because there is so much news going on here this afternoon. It's very busy, looking for your calls and responses on a whole range of issues. We are, of course, picking up on that story. The MOD has been found responsible for that data leak, which put up to 100,000 Afghans at risk of death. I mean, this is serious stuff. Thousands affected have been brought to the UK and billions of taxpayers' money earmarked to handle the crisis. How will the government tackle this? Can I just ask this very straightforward question? Do we have a moral duty to help our Afghan allies? Do we have a moral duty to assist those who helped us? Our lines are open on that. Also this afternoon, free speech under attack as nearly half of Brits feel unable to speak freely on race, immigration or religion. Critics warn Labour's policies, including that curious Islamophobia definition law, risks silence in debate and eroding British values. And universal credit is in chaos as nearly half of claimants don't work and over 1 million foreigners are claiming the benefit. Asylum seekers in taxpayer-funded hotels are working illegally while Labour blocks reforms and the Home Office stays silent. Oh, my goodness. We understand there will be some kind of statement from the Home Secretary this afternoon. Can't say too much at the moment. All will be revealed. Details on the way. Everything you need to know, all the breaking news right here on Talk 0344 499 1000. Do we have a moral duty to help our Afghan allies? 0344 499 1000. I mean, you can call it a blunder, you can call it human error, call it an expensive mistake, call it one of the most dangerous and possibly lethal botched jobs in recent military history. Whatever term you pick, we cannot ignore the magnitude of this story. Now, on a humanitarian side, there could be tens of thousands of British allies in Afghanistan whose lives and the lives of their families are in mortal danger. It's as bad as it gets. If you give the Taliban a big old list of people who either fought or assisted the enemy, then as sure as night follows day, they'll come knocking on your door. In fact, you won't even have a door by the time they finish. You won't have a house or a family, and you'll be dangling from a crane over a slow-burning fire in the village square. Just how they roll over there at Taliban HQ. This is as bad and as compromising as it could get. But is our concern about the actual error or the numbers involved? What you will find, and I'm sure I'm not the first to raise this, I think Julia touched on it. Depending on who you're listening to or depending on which report you're reading, the number of people being brought over to the UK goes between 6,000 and about 19,000. The numbers are at the moment awkward. We'll take what the Defence Secretary said, that we're looking at around about 8,000 people altogether. 7,000 or 8,000. 4,500 Afghans have already come to the UK and there are more to follow. So it's that group of people, but up to 100,000 could be affected by it. So I don't know where the remainder of those people, why they're not on the same list. But what is our response to this? Now, I can't imagine there are 24,000 Afghan interpreters. We will speak to some military voices throughout the course of the show that can shine some light on what jobs these people would have been doing. Some physically fought with the British military. Some were medics. Some were there because they knew the territory and the terrain, and they were guides in that respect. Others worked, as I mentioned, in translation. But how many were in that position, and what is our duty in terms of the follow-up to all of this? Because this is about as dangerous as it gets. And of course, it's been hushed up for the last 3 or 4 years. This was a super injunction that was taken out. Ben Wallace was Defence Secretary at the time, said the government had applied for a 4-month injunction after it became aware of the breach, which a judge converted to a super injunction. Now, the funny thing, I don't know if you remember, there was an era of super injunctions for celebrities. Was that about 10, 12 years ago? Not only did it mean you couldn't talk about the details or the person, you couldn't even mention the even if you mentioned, we can't talk about Bobby Smithers because there's a super injunction. You couldn't even say that. Could have gone to jail for that. These things are treated incredibly serious. Back in the day, they were used for mainly some fairly mucky characters in the world of showbiz who wanted to hide their nefarious and licentious ways. So they took out, at great expense, I'm sure, super injunctions. This was understandably, in the initial stages, a 4-month injunction until we get this sorted. This has rumbled on for years. Ben Wallace said this morning his priority had been to protect those people who could have been or were exposed. The resettlement scheme, the Afghanistan response route, set up last April 2024 for those on the leaked list, has seen 4,500 Afghans come to the UK and a total of 6,900 are expected. Could be a little more than that. The scheme's closure was announced on Tuesday. This is when the super injunction was lifted. Now, don't ask me how they get to these kind of numbers. The scheme has cost 400 million quid, with a projected final cost at 850 million quid. That's about 140,000 per person. Is that over a lifetime of protection? What does that cover exactly? And of course, nobody knew anything about this, and the reasons are various, I'm sure. Maybe there were migration sensitivities, the obvious military and intelligence sensitivities speak for themselves. What is our role in this? And I ask this for an interesting reason. Whenever we talk about immigration, and you'll always get some daft lefty go, trouble is with anyone who's on the right, you lot on the right, you get that. You don't want to help anybody. You hate foreigners. You hate brown people. You don't like the idea that somebody's come from a war-torn place if they don't look or sound like you. But most of those people have caveated and gone, but, you know, most right-wingers have said, yeah, we want to be robust on immigration. But we don't mind assisting people. Ukraine is an obvious example. Afghanistan always comes up. Hong Kong comes up as well. But now we've seen these kind of numbers, and these numbers could be way higher. How do you feel, and what is our moral duty to help our Afghan allies? And I'm going to ask that specific question. What's your wider assessment of this? Did all of these people have incredibly serious and linked roles with the British military? One would assume they did. But does it throw up any question marks for you on the wider issue? 0344 499 1000. This came in from Don, early doors. Thank you, Don, who says, we have allowed the Gurkhas, Hong Kong people, Afghanistan people and illegal migrants to come to the UK. Does no politician ever consider that we are full up and our culture is under threat? And that's an absolute component to this question. Don is bang on to raise that. Why would you not raise that? But of all the different groups of people that come to the UK, how do we define friend or foe? How do we define worthy or not worthy? How do we define people where it is absolutely our almost God-given duty to assist, as distinct from those who are taking the piddle? 0344 499 1000. Let's get a word on this and the other big stories of the day. We have Chloe Dobbs back with us, the political commentator. Afternoon to you, Chloe.
Afternoon, Ian.
Well, let's start with that question and this subject. Just an incredible story. It broke yesterday, just shortly after we came on air. British military data leak exposing up to 100,000 Afghans to Taliban danger. This is a horrendous place for people to be. £7 billion spent on covert evacuation. Successive governments used a super injunction to hide the scandal, and Defence Secretary John Healey has issued a belated apology. Let's hear what he said on that issue of the asylum cover-up.
I can confirm for this House this afternoon that the total cost of all Afghan relocation schemes to date for those 36,000 Afghans that have been brought to this country is around 2.7 billion. The expected cost over the entire life of those schemes to bring anyone who may subsequently be proved eligible for these schemes is between 5.5 and 6 billion pounds, and that is at least 1.2 billion less because of the policy decisions that I've taken this afternoon.
So we're in the billions, Chloe. Is that the question? This is too expensive, or is the question far greater than that?
I think that this is a huge story, but it is very, very messy and nuanced, to be honest. It's not simply a case of oh, Britain's full, we can't have anybody, when you've got to consider the fact that we actually made promises to these people. I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on everything that's gone on in Afghanistan, but I've spoken to a couple of people in the military about this, and they said, we promised these people, you can fight with us, and then you can come to Britain, we'll give you a house, we'll give you a place to stay. And you kind of think, we made a promise to them. Should we really be breaking that promise? We just sort of left Afghanistan and just left them all behind, and didn't follow up on our promises. And one thing that one of my friends who was in the military said to me was, these people, let's say you're in a building and the enemy came to attack you, they would hide the Brit at the back of the building and protect them for dear life, and the Afghans would put themselves up front but risk their lives to keep the Brit alive. They took care of us very, very well, and so for us to just disappear and fail to meet our promises was not very nice of us to do. But this is extremely expensive. 7 billion quid is a heck of a lot of money. It's crazy that this was kept quiet for 2 years. And a lot of people will say, yes, there was a security risk to these people. But for Brits to not know, tax-paying Brits to not know where their money's being spent and who is coming in their country, with such a big scheme is pretty crazy. So I think for this to be kept quiet for 2 years is way too long. I can understand there being some sort of injunction whilst they sort it out and figure out how to keep these people safe, 4 months as was the original plan, but 2 years is absolutely crazy. And then we're hearing from the messages being put out by Nigel Farage and Zia Youssef, who are absolutely taking advantage of this best they can to have a go at the Tories, that some of those people who are coming across to Britain on this scheme are people who have committed sex crimes. I don't know 100% if that is true. I haven't seen all the stats on that aside from what they've put out in their videos. But if that is the case, I don't care if you helped us, if you helped the British military in Afghanistan. If you've committed a sex crime, you definitely should not be coming to Britain and putting our women at risk.
What I find interesting about this story is trying to get to the truth of the numbers involved, because we sort of initially heard 24,000 affected Afghans have been evacuated or will arrive in Britain under this scheme. But then today, the Defence Secretary talks of 4,500 already here, but a total of 6,900. There's a big old chasm between 6,900 and 24,000.
Yeah, that is a very big disparity, and hopefully over the coming days we'll get some clarity on that, because if it's only 6,000 people, I mean, we have it looks like we'll probably be on track to have around 50,000 a year coming across on the small boats, right, who are people coming from countries completely undocumented, some of them from Afghanistan, many of them from other countries, right? So you might say, oh, it's a small number in comparison. But I mean, regardless of, even if the number is only 6,000, still the costs they have cited are extremely high. Yeah. It seems to me, I mean, I haven't got the calculator out and done the exact figures on it, but it seems to me that the cost of bringing each of these Afghans across is more than it costs us to take care of a migrant that comes across on a boat. Indeed.
Let's move to, we are going to continue to take calls on, do we have a moral duty to help our Afghan allies? Thoughts on that? This story also, Chloe, nearly half of universal credit claimants don't need to seek work. There's no obligation to seek work. Over 1 million foreign nationals are on the benefit as well. Experts say the system is absolutely overwhelmed, and Labour, it seems, are blocking reform. Let's have a reminder, though, of what Keir Starmer said earlier this month on
In relation to welfare, what we delivered last night was a bill which ends mandatory reassessment of those with severe disabilities. That is the right thing to do. It rebalances universal credit. That is long overdue, and it sets out a pathway to reform of PIP.
I mean, he really is awful, Chloe, isn't he? I mean, there's no other way of saying it. We've got 3.6 million people exempt from work altogether. Now, if you've got no legs and your head is dented, psychologically speaking, I understand that. Of course, you're going to struggle and you wouldn't be in the work pool and available in the same way. We all understand it. I'm totally happy that my taxes go in that direction. Slightly suspicious that 1 million foreign nationals are also on the benefit when they probably don't need to be.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, when we've clearly got a crisis, the country's clearly going broke. We absolutely should not have people who have moved to this country getting a load of money off the state. It should be the case that if you decide you want to come to Britain, you need to be a net contributor. End of. I don't expect, if I decide I want to move to, I don't know, Spain next week, I don't expect them to give me free healthcare and the state to be giving me money. I would expect if I'm going to move to another country, I only have a right to be there if I'm contributing to that country. So it just seems beyond me that we hand out so much money to people from abroad and there's no sort of distinction between Brits and foreigners. I don't think there's anything racist about that.
I mean, these are a lot of these people. Most of these people are EU citizens that came, you know, they were allowed to stay after Brexit because they ticked all the boxes. But then they're on some kind of benefit. And I would gently say to those people, you know, it's been a Frenchman, a Spaniard, whatever they happen to be, saying it's been lovely having you here, but I'm afraid the minute you start utilising the welfare system, I'm afraid you're going to have to return to your country of origin. That's not too harsh, is it?
They should be told you have to have private healthcare. Especially, I mean, you know what the waiting lists are like on the NHS. It is at breaking point. 100%. It should be the case that if you come to this country, you are not going to make those NHS waiting lists worse. You've got to pay for your own healthcare. End of. I think that's pretty simple. I don't think that's too harsh.
Yeah. Point taken.
And then onto the point of most people not, or what was it, more than half not having to look for work.
Yes.
Well, what's clearly happened is people have massively exploited the mental health benefits, right? You've got so many people, it's absolutely skyrocketing the number signing up for mental health benefits. So rather than saying, oh, I want job seekers allowance, as they may have done in the past, and I've got to go to the job centre every month or however often it is, and say I'm going to X, Y, and Z interview, they're just getting themselves written off as unable to work because they are mentally ill. And apparently, this is what I've heard, is that they have private contractors to do the signing off of people to speed the process up for the mental health benefits. And the way the structure works in terms of how they're paid is they get paid more the more people they sign off as incapable for working.
So there's a whole nest of vipers to look into on how that criteria works. Nobody can, it seems, come up with the definitive answer to it. Listen, Chloe, stay with us. More stories to come. Over to you as well. 0344 499 1000.
We have a moral obligation to ensure that those who worked with British forces were protected. We have a moral obligation to ensure that as many of them as possible are brought to safety. This is a fraught and dangerous enterprise in which individual British soldiers put themselves at risk in order to help people come to this country. So in that respect, well, of course there are regrettable elements. The decisions taken both by the last government and this government are right.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
We have Chloe Dobbs with us, the political commentator. Let's look at this story. Chloe, Labour opening the door to gender identity lessons in schools, scrapping Tory plans to ban the topic. New guidance stops short of ruling out debates on gender identity, sparking Conservative claims of a watered-down approach. Let's remind ourselves of that Supreme Court decision.
The unanimous decision of this court is that the terms woman and sex in the Equality Act 2010 refer to a biological woman and biological sex.
I mean, it's all pretty straightforward stuff, Chloe. What is this urgency to have this taught in schools to kids? Where does that come from? How did we all survive without having it taught in schools?
Yeah, I don't know how I survived as a kid. You know, I got to 18, I had no idea if I was a man or a woman because nobody at school told me. You know, how did we ever survive? My understanding is that what Labour is trying to do here is, well, or so they claim, is they think that kids need to be taught not necessarily all the theory of this is gender identity and this and that, but they need to be told what the legality is on gender reassignment and whatnot. They need to be told what the law is. But I think there's just no doubt that that would open a massive can of worm in schools. Even if the teachers were to try and keep the debate to just talking about what the law is, inevitably that would cause big discussions in the classroom. They'd start pressing teachers, asking them more questions, you know, Can I change to a boy or a girl or this or that? I think it's concerning. And do kids really need to be taught about that?
You don't need there's certain things you just pick up anyway through life, you know. You don't need a lesson in it, for God's sake.
Exactly. I think that if you're going to consider gender reassignment and some sort of surgery, you shouldn't even be considering that until post 18. And I think it's downright dangerous to be talking about that with children, to be honest, because there is a huge problem with children. Even when I was a teenager and there wasn't even any talk of you can change your body to a boy if you're a girl and vice versa. There were already huge problems with teenagers having huge insecurities about their bodies, girls being really upset that their bodies weren't skinny enough and not the right shape.
It's just all of that nonsense.
It's bad enough already. Do we need to give them more insecurity where not only do they think, oh, my body's not the right shape, my hair's not the right colour and this and that, but they also think, oh, maybe I'm in the wrong body, I've been born with the wrong parts, I need to change my gender. You don't need to
go there. Look, I was traumatised at school when little Bo Peep lost her sheep. Discovering that somebody lost their Jacobs, I think that would be slightly more disturbing. So let's leave that to some other part of life, I think. Very quickly on this one, if we can, Chloe, we've got about 60 seconds. 6 patient deaths have been linked to the use of substitute doctors by the NHS. Of course, they're not actually doctors, they're physician associates, PAs. Very worthy job. They have certain elements of medical qualification. They've been through a process, but they're not doctors. They're substitutes on the NHS, and there is some concern about them working under the name doctor supervision after what has happened.
Yeah, an absolute disgrace. I'm really sad that people have lost their lives because of this, that there are huge mistakes made in the NHS, not just by these physician associates, but by doctors themselves, because they're so stressed and overrun that their brains are just not quite working properly. The NHS is just an absolute mess at the moment, and they clearly need to change this to make sure that physician associates are not making the decisions of doctors.
Very briefly, nothing to do with any of this. Somebody just texted in and says, does Chloe think the programme you featured in on Channel 4 had a narrative narrative that all asylum seekers are genuine. I didn't think it came out as that.
Well, that's not what I said on the programme. I was talking on the programme. The only caveat I would add to that is you have to bear in mind with the people that we were interviewing, the asylum seekers that we were interviewing, is that the people who volunteer to be interviewed are not going to be the people who are running away from crimes they've committed in another country.
True.
So you have to bear in mind that it's not completely representative.
You
there were a mix of voices on that show
who are likely to be people who genuinely want to leg it for good reasons or bad, whatever. When I say bad, I mean as in not fulfilling serious criteria for being an asylum seeker, but nonetheless wanted to change their life. They weren't criminals. They didn't harm people. They're the ones that were most likely to say, yeah, I don't mind talking to you.
Yeah, and I think it's important to show most people have an opinion, or at least a lot of people have an opinion, that every single person coming across on a boat to Britain is just some evil criminal who's just doing it for a hotel. They've never been in any danger, and that's actually not the case. That doesn't mean I don't have concerns about people with backwards views about women and criminals coming across on those boats, but it's
100%.
important to understand the whole picture.
There it is, Chloe. Great stuff. Thank you, as ever, Chloe Dobbs, with us on the programme. Over to you, 0344 499 1000. Reference that Afghan story. Do we have a moral duty to help our Afghan allies? Answer that. We've got Bob Seeley, former Tory MP, coming on, the statistician and economist Jamie Jenkins, also Ash Alexander-Cooper, former specialist military unit commander, knows his stuff, the real terrain of Afghanistan, and also Councillor John Edwards, who's got some concerns in his own constituency about the Afghan resettlement scheme. He had that before this story broke. We'll find out what he thinks now. Details coming next right here on Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
0344 499 1000. We are talking about that shocking data breach exposing Afghan records, 33,000, 100,000, depending on who you listen to. These are staggering numbers, risking lives, creating a Taliban kill list, essentially, while the government hid the scandal under a 2-year super injunction. We understand $7 billion spent on evacuations. No disciplinary action as yet for those responsible. Critics are slamming the government's failure to ensure transparency and accountability. Let's get a word on this from Bob Seeley, former Tory MP. Afternoon to you, Bob. This was happening while you were still a member of Parliament. Were you aware of this? Was there a word on the street, a whisper that this had happened?
No, completely not. Hi, Ian, and good afternoon to your viewers and listeners. Absolutely not. I was on the Foreign Affairs Committee. I actually served with some of these people as well, and I'm still reasonably plugged into that world. And I didn't have an inkling of this whatsoever. And I don't think anyone out of a very, very small number of individuals did.
I'm sure you too have been confused by some of the numbers. They are slightly contradictory, whether it's 24,000, 100,000, whether we already have 19 or 24,000 here, whether we've got 6,000 here. They seem to be all... what we do know is it's many, many thousands of people. What is our assessment of those people and what they would have been doing? I mean, they clearly weren't all translators. What sort of roles did Afghan allies have when it came to the British military?
Good question. I mean, one of the things that slightly concerns me is just the numbers. And I think the reason you're looking at the bigger numbers, because for every person who comes here, they'll bring at least 4, if not up to 10 people with them, which I think is one of the things that is really going to frustrate people. Let's talk about the timing of this in a second. Some of these people are translators. Some of these people are going to be sort of Afghan special forces. So I think 444 and 333. Who are good guys, but then their numbers are really quite small. You're talking about dozens, if not hundreds, low hundreds, plus support staff. So what slightly frustrates me here is that we've had a chance to maybe cap the number of people who come with those individuals, and that, it seems to me, was turned down. God knows why, because that was a Conservative government that should have been doing something different. And a lot of these guys were young, somewhat unmarried, but if they were married, they didn't, you're not talking about bringing half a village with you. So we're talking hundreds of Afghan special forces who we work closely with and train, maybe 1,200 tops, but the thousands of others are just, we have a responsibility and duty to people. But actually, I think what's really gripping lots of people in this country is that government actually has a responsibility to the British people, and there's so much evidence in the last few years we seem to be becoming lost in everything.
Yeah, and this is, of course, we'll talk to Jamie Jenkins in a second just about the sheer economics of this. I mean, there's the eye-watering numbers, 7 billion quid spent on evacuations. Don't know how that's broken down.
Yeah, Ian, on that point, effectively, we're going to have, at the end of this process, unless we radically change course, which we won't, we're going to effectively have an Afghan city of 100 to 150,000 people. Wow. Now, on one hand, we should be looking after former allies, but 100 to 150,000 people, that is a massive, massive number.
Yeah, so you would part company with that number in the sense that, as a former military man as well, you just wouldn't recognise that amount of people would have been involved.
Oh, completely not. But you're talking about dependence. So you're talking about what happens at the end of a stage where the British state says yes to everything apart from the interests of the British people. So you're looking at big numbers here, because big numbers will come with individuals who will be absolutely sort of tanked up with immigration lawyers who will be gaming the system from the word go. The other problem with this is that, I wish every single Afghan who came to this country, fitted in really easily and really well. The reality is that if you're an Afghan male here, your chances of being a criminal, a sex offending criminal, rape, assault, sexual assault, is 23 times higher than the national average. Wow. So we are importing people, some of whom are going to be immediately committing pretty horrible crimes, and some of whom, especially from the Pashtun belt, have a sort of cultural attitude to child sodomy, dare I say it, underage marriage, which is completely at odds with our society. And I think that is the big question. It's an uncomfortable question, and we know that especially against the backdrop of this story, but it's a very real one. Bob, thank you. Very thorough stuff, as ever. Bob Seeley, former Tory MP, former military personnel as well. Let's get a word from Jamie Jenkins, political and economic commentator. Jamie, good afternoon to you. I mean, Bob was talking about the sort of social impact there, but I mean, let's just have a little look at the finances here. How do these numbers stack up? 7 billion quid and counting, we're told.
Yeah, I think that's one of the kind of confusing parts of this story, is all of these different numbers that are being banded around from the Defence Secretary in Parliament, doing media interviews across this morning as well. So I think what they're talking about is the numbers could range between 6 to 19,000, and that could span many years. Now, when he said that on one of the media outlets this morning, I think the confusing part there would be is, why would you need to span many years to bring people in when, obviously, if they're in immediate danger, you need to sort it out immediately. But in terms of the finances, Ian, I think what he was saying in Parliament is that 2.7 billion has been allocated for all the schemes so far. That could rise to around 5 to 6 billion. But put the number, I suppose, in kind of context, because I think you've been talking on the show about that we have a moral obligation to kind of host some of these people because of the kind of the support they were giving to some of the troops there. And just remember, for all asylum seekers, the latest estimates for accommodation is about £5 billion. So on one hand, do you have more of a moral obligation to fund this part, which is this cost us 2.7 billion so far, that could rise to 5 to 6 billion over the entire lifetime of the schemes, versus the 5 billion that goes on asylum accommodation for those coming on small boats or overstaying their visas and then claiming asylum.
Yeah. You wonder where this money comes from. I mean, I know governments have a sort of bottom drawer, even at times of, when there's existing crisis elsewhere. And let's face it, we've got a lot of those financially at the moment. But this is an incredible number to be able to stump up, and possibly for many, many years to come. Yeah,
well, I'll tell you where the money comes from. It comes from us, Ian. Your 100%. Viewers, your listeners. Ultimately, we have to borrow more money. Borrowing, I think Keir Starmer was again in Prime Minister's questions today talking about the 22 billion black hole that he inherited from the Tory party, which the OBR never kind of confirmed that. And the Labour government, in the first kind of 9 or 10 months of their government, they borrowed 55 billion more than what the OBR were forecasting. And ultimately, that's what goes on. If we've got unexpected spend that comes, the government has to borrow more money. Sure. It's me and you who are paying for that. It goes on to the national debt. And I think that the more interesting thing, the numbers here, it's more the local social impact, I think, Ian. When you start putting people into small local communities, local authority budgets have to fund this as well. And that takes things away from other services that are being provided locally. Yeah,
trying to balance that with whatever our moral duty might be. Listen, Jamie, great stuff. Thank you. Jamie Jenkins, political and economic commentator. That is the question. Do we have a moral duty to help all of our Afghan allies? Let's get a word from Ash Alexander Cooper, OBE, former specialist military unit commander and former senior advisor to the Afghan Ministry of Interior Affairs. Ash, good afternoon to you, sir. Nice to have you with us. You know this terrain well, you know this territory. What do you make, firstly, of the numbers? And as we've said with our previous guests, they do seem to be sort of all over the place, these numbers, from 20,000 here, 100,000, is it 33,000? We know it's tens of thousands involved. Do you recognise those sheer amounts in terms of the kind of assistance that Afghans were giving to the British military during that time of being there?
Well, I think the list, the numbers on that initial list of 18,000 or so is the actual individuals that were working with the British government in some capacity, or certainly applying. I mean, this list is people who are applying for the settlement scheme. It's not that they were actually necessarily all going to be accepted or did the job that they might be claiming the scheme sort of application for.
Yeah, fair point.
So I think the number of up to 100,000 is considering that they're likely to have family members with them. So I think that's where the higher number comes in. But certainly the numbers who were, for in some cases 20 years, supporting us in many roles that put them, their own and their friends and colleagues' lives at risk is certainly in the high hundreds. And then I know personally people who've been murdered, tortured, kidnapped, and basically living in fear or still in hiding many years later because they were abandoned and haven't been supported. So I would certainly think that the numbers are quite high, and understand that not everybody on that list should have been reallocated or would ever have got a chance to, but certainly there are many who were absolutely eligible, and we do owe them a huge debt of gratitude, and we've abandoned them.
And of course, that would include dependents as well. So when we see these figures, 4,500, 6,000, I think the Defence Secretary talked of 6,900 expected. But one would assume that would mean family members too. On our moral obligation, if you fought for, even people who are viciously opposed to immigration have usually acknowledged, well, actually, the guys in Afghanistan that helped the British military, they're the people we should lay the red carpet out for, because these people not only fought or assisted in varying ways, medical, terrain, the geography, the culture, and all of that, translation, but they doubly put their life on the line, of course, because they're not only fighting a war, but they're fighting a war knowing that around the corner, if they were caught, the consequences of the Taliban finding out about this were absolutely horrific.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the challenge for these, the pressure that these people have been under, not just when they were serving, in some cases, as I said, for up to 20 years, that it was incredible pressure and trauma. Many have PTSD from the work they did with us and for us. And we do owe them, as I said, a huge debt of gratitude and should be supporting them. But the numbers, I would not ever suggest that we should be supporting every single person on that list, not at all. But there are a core group who absolutely fought with us, stood by us day in, day out with no sort of thought to their own personal safety and huge risk to their families. And some of those have been murdered, tortured, kidnapped, and their families as well because of that service that they gave us.
What sort of, I mentioned some of the kind of roles that that these people would have taken part in. From your experience, and you know the area well, you know what an Afghan battlefield looks like, and you know you've experienced all of that. How crucial were Afghan personnel to the British military and the wider allies, I guess, but certainly the British military? What was your assessment of what these people did?
Well, it evolved over time. If you think back to the 2001 activities, it was very much just Brits doing their thing, and they would rent, or not rent, but they would hire locals to be interpreters. But over time, as the British government sought to support the Afghan government in growing its own capabilities, it became more and more Afghan-led, more professional, and so the Brits and other coalition partners tried to take more of a back seat and support the Afghans in building up their own capacity and capability. But in terms of what we did with them, I mean, I spent nearly 4 years there overall over the course of a number of years. I've seen Afghans, shot and killed and blown up in front of me. They would do anything we wanted them to do because they believed in the future of Afghanistan, which sadly didn't play out as any of us hoped. But the way that we helped train them and support them, they were in all sorts of roles, from, as we know very publicly, interpreters, but through to policemen and soldiers and many officials in between, including sort of civilians that were performing key roles for us that were equally in the crosshairs of the Taliban because they were working so closely with the coalition governments.
Yeah, and I suppose it's just a kind of an irredeemable reality, isn't it? If you have an Afghan resettlement scheme, naturally those people will want to be part of it, but it's kind of inevitable, isn't it, that many other Afghans who might not have been would say, well, I'm going to stick my name on that list. It's not a place I want to be either.
Well, this is part of the problem that you'll recall back in August 2021 when that scramble to leave Kabul. I mean, the airport was a melee of people, a majority of whom had no right to leave at all on any of the coalition aircraft. And that did prevent hundreds, if not thousands, of eligible people from getting on the planes legitimately. And I've seen, and I still have copies of, Foreign Office emails to people saying after it was clear that the last flight had left, saying, we believe you didn't make it. However, please sort of trust us effectively that we will look after you and support you because you are eligible and will help you get to safety. They still cling on to those letters, believing that the British government will be true to its word, and it has not been. And that's disappointing because I think we'll find it hard to get people to trust us again if we need other countries' help in the future in other conflict zones in the world.
Indeed. And Ash, just a final point. When this story broke yesterday, was it new news to you? Were you familiar with the basic nuts and bolts of this?
I mean, we were familiar with the difficulties that there were many people who had been left behind, and that the government was struggling to process and understand who would be eligible and how to support them. But I think the extent and the scale of the issue wasn't known by anybody apart from those who've been injuncted, probably, who knew the details. So it's come as a shock, and it's just poured more concern and terror really on some of the people who are still very much in the crosshairs of the Taliban.
Listen, Ash, great to have you on with us. Thank you, sir. Ash Alexander Cooper, OBE, former Specialist Military Unit Commander and also a Senior Advisor to the Afghan Ministry of Interior Affairs. Let's get a word from Councillor John Edwards, Independent Town Councillor in Bracknell. John, good afternoon to you. It's interesting, this, because you were kind of on this story in a different way before this broke, because you'd already raised concerns about your own area in Bracknell, where you were seeing constituents that were perhaps just, not against helping people who'd helped us. I think there are about 300 in your area that have been assisted, migrated from Afghanistan to Bracknell. But you already had questions on this, and I would imagine overnight those questions have somewhat expanded, and you're certainly not the only person thinking it now.
Yeah, well, I feel slightly vindicated, that's for sure. But yeah, we had 300 Afghans arrive, and they've been put up into a 4-star hotel, and they get their food and obviously their bills paid for in universal. They also get what's called wraparound care, which is a very vague term, and move on support. And I just want to make it clear that, I just want to echo previous statements, that the people who, I believe they should be given sanctuary here in the UK, and they should be looked after, and obviously they should be treated in respect. But the problem is that that level of care and welfare isn't available to Bracknell residents, and that's who I represent. You know, I've had single mothers contact me in the housing waiting list, inappropriate housing. You know, she's got 4 kids. She's 7 weeks pregnant, 7 months pregnant. She has to walk up, you know, flights of stairs in a 1-bed flat, mold on the walls so bad that it's hospitalized their kids. And she's still in this house and she's not able to get off the housing list. And she said to me, I feel like I failed, John. But we've seen here that this scheme is just being signed off for £7 billion like that.
Yeah.
And when we're told there's no more money. And I said to her, you haven't failed. You have been failed. You've been failed by a system which has forgotten you and is now falling over itself to help other people. And I've heard from veterans as well in similar situations, homeless, sofa surfing, living with their mums. Another veteran also had his kids hospitalised with respiratory conditions from the mould in his flat. He still hasn't been helped. So I find this totally scandalous. And while we might want to help these people who have served our armed forces, which is very noble, it got to be paid for and planned properly. It can't be paid for out of people's housing and education.
Because what it looks as if we're going to see, in fact, now this story is out, the numbers are far greater. It was all just kept very, very quiet. So 300 in Bracknell, if you look at that across the country in various ways, this story is replicated in towns up and down the land and is going to continue to be replicated. And you're absolutely right. You can hold both views on this. We can be caring and understanding and thankful and want to help those who fought for us. But simultaneously, you have to draw a bit of a line and say, hang on, veterans, elderly, the vulnerable, taxpayers who've paid into the system are living in squalor and poverty. And yet you come from another country and you know, even understanding the amazing work some of these people did, that's just not fair.
No, it's not fair. And that's the main issue. But the other issue is that it wasn't told to us. It's had no scrutiny in this policy. I'm absolutely flabbergasted that £7 billion has just been signed off without any scrutiny. That we are supposed to live in a democratic country. That is not democratic. But this cult silence goes down to the local level as well, because this was framed to us as just people who served our armed forces. That isn't true. There's obviously the family members. There's also, it encompasses another pathway, which is the ACRS, which also includes people who are deemed vulnerable by the UN. So that can be LGBT people, women, and you know, these people come as well. And it was never framed to us. We were told that it wouldn't impact the housing list, but because of the questions I asked, it then came out that actually, if you go through the MOD paperwork, it shows that they encourage the Afghans to apply for homelessness if they can't secure private accommodation in the 9 months they stay in the hotel. 9 months they stay in a hotel. And we're just being drip-fed information. And then, of course, I've come under attack as hateful, you know, racist or whatever. And actually... Have
you had that in the council meetings, John? Have you had stick or have you had any support in what you're trying to put forward?
I've had no support. I've been the only councillor who's scrutinised this policy. I've had a Labour councillor call the police on me, saying that I shouldn't be scrutinising this policy.
Wow.
I even put forward, the Lib Dems put forward a motion, check this out here, the Lib Dems put out forward a motion, it was a virtue signalling motion that just said, we welcome the Afghans to our area who served our armed forces. I said, I totally support this. That's absolutely fine. But I want to put an amendment into this motion that says we also call for equal treatment for our residents and veterans.
100%.
And every single Lib Dem and Labour and only 3 Conservatives backed it. Everyone else voted against it.
Wow. In terms of your own politics, you were a Conservative, you're now independent. Is there a political party out there that can sort all of this? Are you tempted to go elsewhere? Can you see an answer in the wings anywhere?
I think the country I think we're on one of our last chances to save our country with the next general election. And yeah, quite honestly, I think that lies with Reform UK.
Well, we're going to watch with interest. Let's speak again, John, and keep in touch. John Edwards, Councillor John Edwards, independent now councillor for Bracknell. You can see the scenes of the squealing masses at the council meetings. You're a racist. No, I'm not saying that. Stop telling me things I didn't say. Concentrate on what I did say, but that's not how kind of left-wing warped thinking works, which is why it's so horrific, anti-intellectual and bilious. That's his view, that's his thoughts. Yours we're looking for now. Do we have a moral duty to help our Afghan allies? 0344 499 1000.
We have a moral obligation to ensure that those who worked with British forces were protected. We have a moral obligation to ensure that as many of them as possible are brought to safety. This is a fraught and dangerous enterprise in which individual British soldiers put themselves at risk in order to help people come to this country. So in that respect, well, of course there are regrettable elements. The decisions taken both by the last government and this government are right.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This came in from Anne, who says, we have a moral duty to look after our elderly too, as does our government. Look what happened there. Spot on. I mean, how much longer can this go on for? And I'm pretty sure, I think Bob Seeley, the former Tory MP, and Ash Alexander Cooper, the former military man, I think they both referred to the number of people that were assisting the British military in the hundreds. I'm sure they both, at least one of them said it, in the hundreds. We're looking at figures here of tens of thousands, potentially. Peter's in Croydon. What have you got for us, Pete? Good afternoon.
Hello, Ian. Good afternoon.
Hi.
I watched the PMQs today, and I could not believe it. I mean, Starmer, how he had the cheek to stand up and preach his self-righteous crap, excuse my French, and come up and say, oh, you know, all this and all that. It was the Tories to blame, but he's had a year to.
He's had a year, and you can sort stuff out in a year. You can certainly sort stuff out like this, making life. I think most Brits are asking for a bit of fairness, Peter. You know, I want to help anyone who's helped us, but I also want to help those that are domestically in need as well.
Absolutely, Ian. And of course we have a moral duty to look after these people, but it's inevitable that people are going to take the mickey. I mean, you know, we're going to bring in their families, and look at the women. I'm sorry, I'm not being misogynist here, but the women, they pop out kids like Pez machines, you know, and they do. It's like in Gaza, the same. And God, it's going to be an explosion.
Well, you kind of wonder. Listen, Peter, I'm going to give you full house points as well for the Pez machine analogy, which works perfect. I'd never even heard that said before, but, you know, that conjures up every image you want to. Yeah, the Pez machine. Peter, thank you. Good man. Robert's down in London. Come on, Robert, what have you got for us?
Oh dear, Ian, what a day. I didn't think that a lie on that scale was possible in the UK. But I tell you what, I'm pretty sure a lot of investment managers and asset managers globally will be tapping their screens and won't believe this story because, how do you get through the 7 billion? Does that mean that the ONS were or the OBR were producing, or the Treasury were producing false stats? They put the numbers in one bracket rather than another?
Yeah, well, one would assume if there's this super injunction, they must have been somehow able to, mask the figures.
Which, if you're an investor, is very concerning.
Yeah, true.
And you're worried as well. You're worried anyway with the UK because the last 25 years has seen complete maniacs running it. But look, I called to say that yesterday was the big eye-opener for me, and the following points I'm making are just facts. This is what's happened. This isn't theory. I'm not supposing anything. This is where we are today. It is now possible for the government to silence the media with a super injunction that not only bans reporting, but conceals the very existence of it. Okay.
Yes.
You're able to spend billions of pounds as a government without a vote, without a line in the budget, and without the scrutiny of the estimates process. I just never thought it was possible.
Is it? The argument, I guess, Robert, would be, well, if there's a national security issue around it, then sometimes things like that will happen. I'm not saying that as my opinion, but that would be their defence.
Well, if you're at war, I would get it, but we're not.
This is after a war.
I don't think that this was justified. But there's a few more things. You can initiate, or the government can now initiate, because the precedent's been set. The government can initiate a multi-year state programme through ministerial discretion alone, right? A few judges, a few ministers, because most of them are all denying they knew about it, and avoid legislation entirely.
Very good point.
The government can now bypass local government, impose central decisions territorially without no consultation or statutory delegation.
And do you know what? You could understand it, the 3 or 4 month thing, I got, there was an injunction, 3 or 4 months while they work it out. But 3 or 4 years, we're in different territory. Robert, I've got to move on. I'm sure you have more to say, but they're brilliant points. Thank you, Robert, down in London. Ken says, can I ask a question? Ken is a former British Army veteran. Can I ask a question referencing the Afghan soldiers, special forces translators being brought into the UK? Our armed forces are struggling for numbers. If we train these soldiers, could we not put a clause into their application to enter the UK? If there was a soldier in their town or country, they have to complete our army selection course and serve in our armed forces. Swear allegiance to the king. If they're not prepared to do that, then back on the plane. It's an interesting point, isn't it? Thank you very much indeed for that, Ken. More from you, 0344 499 1000. Do we have a moral duty to help our Afghan allies? First, though, before we go back to it, let's get the latest news headlines and talk. The time, 2 o'clock.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good afternoon. 3 minutes after 2 o'clock. So, the Ministry of Defence has been found responsible for a data leak that put up to 100,000 Afghans at risk of death, thousands affected being brought to the UK, and billions of taxpayer money earmarked to handle the crisis. How is our government going to tackle this? We're asking this question as well. Do we have a moral duty to help our Afghan allies? And what counts as an ally? It's a reasonable question. More comment from you. Loads of great calls and messages so far. Also this afternoon, universal credit is in chaos. Who knew? Nearly half of claimants don't work. Over 1 million foreigners claiming the benefit. Asylum seekers in taxpayer-funded hotels working illegally while Labour blocks reforms and the Home Office stays silent. I think there is a statement from the Home Secretary this afternoon. Whether it goes into this territory, who knows? And free speech is under attack as nearly half of Brits feel unable to speak freely on race, immigration and religion. Critics are warning that Labour's policies, including that Islamophobia definition, risk silencing debate and eroding British values. All of those stories and more on the way. The crucial part of this show, like most shows here on Talk, are your comments along the way. 0344 499 1000. If you want to leave a voice message, that's a way of bypassing the queues. Same number, 0344 499 1000. Or you can just message us on 87222, and we'll bring you all the latest and all the breaking news right here on Talk. Barry says, afternoon Ian, this country spent millions training Afghan military, and as soon as they had to look after themselves, they ran. It was a total waste of time, lest we forget, says Barry. In terms of self-responsibility, Russell Harper says, I moved to Spain 2 years ago. I had to prove an income of $34,000 a year for 5 years. I had to prove private healthcare. Why are we such a soft touch? Says Russell, who's sunning his toes in Alicante. Very nice indeed. Here's another man who doesn't mind a bit of sunburn on the old toes. I don't know where I was going with that, really. Kevin Schofield is with us, political editor at HuffPost UK. Afternoon to you, Kevin. This is an interesting one, because often in this job, as you know far better than me, you've done it a long time, you do cop holder stories that you just can't report. Sometimes it's a bit of a rumour, a bit of tittle-tattle, and you think, well, it'd be great if I could talk, but I can't really stand it up, as the phrase goes. Other times you're aware that there is something that, but you just can't say it, for whatever reason. But this one really did elude everybody, senior military personnel, former MP. We had Michael Gove was on with Julia earlier. He did know about it because he was housing minister at the time, and there was an implication to his department. But he said if he was in education, he wouldn't have known about it. So it was really only a handful of people.
Yeah, no, I mean, this super injunction really did work because, as you know, you can't even report the fact that there is a super injunction.
Yes.
It's complete. It's as if
you end up in front of the beak if you do that.
Exactly. It's as if it has never happened. And no, I didn't. I mean, I know that defence correspondents, and there were a few of them leading the charge, Larissa Brown at the Times, Lewis Goodall was involved, I think the FT, Lucy Fisher at the FT. So there were those who were involved in the story, defence correspondents, and were taking it to court, fighting for this super injunction to be lifted. They were obviously aware, but because of its very nature, they obviously had to keep it at a very tight circle as well.
Yes, because they couldn't, if you said to Jerome Starkey at the Sun or something, what are you working on, Jerome? He wouldn't be able to go, I've got this great story at the moment, I'm trying to find a database. He wouldn't even be able to say that.
No, absolutely, because then by word of mouth it just gets out there.
And you could, genuinely, you could end up in jail for that.
Oh, absolutely.
That's how serious, because it's almost a crime against the court, isn't it? And
absolutely.
There's nothing a court hates more than a crime against itself.
Absolutely. So, it's right, it would be seen as very disrespectful to the court, and given that there were national security implications to it as well, and just by its very nature how unusual it was that the government was the ones who were taking out the super injunction. It was fairly unprecedented. So all of these things meant that it was kept a very tight circle. As you say, Michael Gove, as a minister whose responsibilities at the time covered this area, he would have to know. But yeah, even outside that tight circle, that was very much not known.
Well, George in Luton, who's written the most polite message ever, he says, it's like a letter. He says, "Dear Ian," I like that.
Respect.
Proper respect. Yeah. Dear Ian, the thing I find most worrying about the Afghan issue is how many other super injunctions are in force that we don't know about or may never know about. Best wishes, George, brackets, from Luton.
Yeah.
It's a good point, George.
And we can't talk about them.
Let's exchange our kind of guesses at super. Julia Hartley-Brewer's had one for years.
Oh, that's well known.
Yeah, it's well known. But, I mean, you know, if you moonlight as a psychic while you're also writing for the Daily Express, that's kind of going to come out at some point, isn't it?
It is. You've only got yourself to
She was very good, though. Oh, she could see things no other psychic could see.
She must see it coming, though, obviously, if that's her job. You know, she must know that it will come out one day.
Specialised in rune stones, apparently. So I heard. So this is interesting, though, because, of course, the government today are the ones, they would claim, picking up the pieces. John Healey, the Defence Secretary, has been out sort of talking to the media and the like, saying, look, we've got this situation we're going to try and deal with. Not shying away from the numbers, though, £7 billion. And many of our callers picked up, particularly our last call before the news, Robert, who said, how do they make that work on the books? That you're spending £7 billion that you can't mention.
Yeah, I think that would have been difficult. I don't think they are spending £7 billion. I think you worded it correctly at the top of the hour there by saying that it was earmarked. So I think the £7 billion was there just in case. I'm not sure how it would ever have got to such a number, because now they're saying it's between 400 million and 850 million.
Yeah.
So, and I think it's in the final analysis, it's 6,900 Afghans are coming over.
That's the MOD official line.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So, but yeah, I mean, there's no doubt. I've seen the court documents reported today that that £7 billion figure hasn't been plucked out of thin air. It was there on the court documents as a potential cost to it. Now, were it to have ended up costing that, then ultimately that would have been the Chancellor's responsibility on top of everything else.
Indeed.
To try and find the money, and that is an awful lot. I mean, that's more than the government was looking to cut from welfare, which they ended up not.
That's what I mean.
It's a significant amount of money at a time when the government doesn't have a lot of money to spend. Does it
in any way go to... there's very little trust, it seems, in governments these days. I know some of that is fuelled by the sort of 24-hour nature of news and social media. You can sort of go mad if you only look through that part of the telescope. But nonetheless, it doesn't do any favours for governments, does it, in terms of trust and the like? No,
I think it's such a terrible look. It's the democracy works if you can analyse everything that the government does, hold it to account, challenge it, and then ultimately pass judgment at the ballot box. If the government is doing things and literally going to court to stop the public finding out and stopping the media from reporting it, then that surely goes against the democratic process, because they could be getting up to all sorts of things that you would never have known about. In which case, when you go into the polling station, you are not fully informed, as you should be, about whether or not you want to vote for them or vote for them.
That's true. And you do want... I mean, as far as we know, the person who was responsible for this leak we hear they moved to other duties.
Yeah.
I mean, you clearly got to do a lot in the MOD to lose your job if you just move to other duties. You do. I mean, was it was somebody writing an email, writing it out there to, I don't know, Ben Wallace at government.co.uk, Penny Mordaunt, Bobby Bin Laden? I mean, oh no, I've sent it to Bobby Bin Laden. I mean, was it that? I mean, how did this happen, for God's sake?
Well, it turns out it was a soldier. So a lot of the MOD staff are civilian, but also military staff work in the MOD, and I was reading it in the Times this morning that it wasn't what you call a traditional pen pusher, someone like, as we all envisage what civil servants look like. It was an actual member of the armed forces who was obviously working in this particular area. Now, Ben Wallace, who was Defence Secretary at the time this came out, he painted a picture this morning on the radio and also writing in the Telegraph of it being an incredibly chaotic situation, because I think it was 18 months between this email being sent accidentally before even the MOD were aware. So it was a year and a half before somebody apparently issued some sort of threat on Facebook to reveal it, and then all of a sudden it was panic stations at the MOD. So it sounds as though it was pretty chaotic. There was all sorts of things going on, and in this sort of melee, this person has accidentally sent out this email thinking that there was only a limited amount of information on it, but in actual fact there was more on the attachment, a data set as it's described, with tens of thousands of names and potentially putting these people at risk.
Kemi Badenoch apologised on behalf of the Conservative Party.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know whether they would specifically take the blame, but OK, maybe it's the right thing for her to do that. But what about PMQs? Let's come back to that, where you've just hot-footed it from.
Yeah.
How was it today, and what were the salient points?
Yeah, she very purposefully avoided any mention of it. Now, Keir Starmer, at the very beginning, before he had even answered a question, got his retaliation in first when it comes to the Afghan data leak. He says that the Conservatives have serious questions to answer, so clearly trying to apportion all the blame on Kemi Badenoch. She didn't rise to the bait. I think she just wanted to avoid it entirely. I thought she was pretty good today, actually. She's definitely much more relaxed, much more at ease in that environment. And there was a real end-of-term feel to it, because, believe it or not, that is the last we'll see of PMQs now until about the middle of September, when they come back briefly from summer recess. So she was just pointing at the government's failures. Inflation obviously going up again this morning. There was the figures a few days ago on the economy contracting again, 2 months in a row. So there's a lot there for her to go on. I mean, Keir Starmer just does not answer the questions. He just has his script and he sticks to it. 22 billion
He probably does that more than most of them.
I think he does.
They all give it a go
to
he just
doesn't engage, does not engage.
He really doesn't.
It's really quite tiresome, actually. Yeah. And he's now, he repeats it just about every week, accusing Kemi Badenoch of coming and talking Britain down, which is just so boring. And
Miliband went there the other day, didn't he? I mean, there was a very similar thing with, Lee Anderson asked a not unreasonable question about, you're doing all of this, you're spending a lot of money on the green initiatives. Can you give us an idea of how temperatures will come down?
Yeah.
I thought that was a fair question. And Miliband, he firstly preceded the answer with, I will answer this, and then proceeded quite literally and demonstrably not to answer it.
Yeah.
But he also finished his sentence by saying, or his answer by saying, unlike the honourable gentleman, I took this country up, not down. I thought, where does that come? What is that? Have they been told this in a meeting somewhere?
I mean, I've heard it from numerous prime ministers, and it usually means that they don't have an answer to the question, so they accuse the leader of the opposition of talking the country down, of being unpatriotic, when it is literally their job to ask difficult questions of the government. They're not 100%. Supposed to get up there saying, you know what, you've done really well this week, Prime Minister, well done. I mean, that is not their job. They have to pick apart what the government is doing and hold it up to the light, so that, as we were mentioning earlier, so that voters are informed about what the government is doing. Now, I just
I mean, that is literally their job.
It is literally their job, and I roll my eyes, because it's not just Keir Starmer. It's been going on, every single Prime Minister. You can go back through them all, talking, and it's just pathetic, really. Let's
look at this story connected to everything. Rachel Reeves getting a bit of a brutal reality check just hours after claiming that Labour are making progress on the economy. There's been a pretty grim set of figures. We know that inflation has risen, nearly double the Bank of England 2% target. Growth is woeful at the moment. I think we've got the unemployment stats tomorrow.
Yeah,
am I right in saying?
And that's been all going in the wrong direction.
Flagging that's gone in the wrong direction as well. So it's very hard for a chancellor to sort of take those kind of numbers and say, no, it's all going swimmingly under us.
Well, that's right. So last night she had her Mansion House speech, which the Chancellor has to deliver once a year. And as you might imagine, she was trying to talk up what the government's been doing and say, we've been making progress on this, this and this, and we're trying to make it better for business, to help grow the economy, and just obviously trying to enhance or highlight the positive. And there have been a few, but not that many. And then, lo and behold, 12 hours later, 7 o'clock this morning, bang, the ONS data comes out. And it wasn't just the fact that inflation had gone up, it wasn't expected to go up, it was meant to, it was 3.4% in May. Economists expected it to stay there, and it's gone up to 3.6, which is nudging really close to double the Bank of England's target.
And predictions that it'll be 4% by the autumn,
which is not good. And also,
that's not a good look.
It's not good, and it'll make it more difficult for the Bank of England to lower interest rates.
And she probably knew that number last night when she was giving that speech. She would have had notice of it, obviously. So it's very hard. One of the first chancellors I've seen, by the way, Kevin, and as I was watching bits of the Mansion House speech, I was busy for the rest of the time gnawing my own elbows. So, but the bits that I did catch, I just thought it's interesting because of all the damage that's been done. I don't just mean the fact she got upset the other day, and there could be many reasons for that, but the IFE CV, I didn't sense... I mean, when Jeremy Hunt was the Chancellor, I didn't have much faith in him either, but I sort of sensed that he's sort of clever enough, and I wasn't aware that there'd been an IFE CV. And Gordon Brown, when he was Chancellor, again, not everybody's cup of tea, but you sort of thought, well, somewhere in there he's across it.
And he's did it for a long time.
Yeah, and Rachel Reeves, I just thought, she just looked damaged, and it's therefore difficult to take someone seriously when there's been so many headlines about it.
I think it's always going to be difficult for her to come back from the crying on the front bench during PMQs, the highlight of the parliamentary week. The bit where I dare say most people who do have a past interest in politics will make an effort to maybe tune in for that. I'm not saying most of the country do it, but you know, it's probably the most watched part of the week.
Of course.
So a lot of people saw it, and I think we've discussed before, ironically, it strengthened her position in that the bond markets had a bit of a wobble because they thought she was going to lose her job. So actually it enhanced her. But on a personal level, it is difficult for her, and I don't think the rumours about her own personal future will go away over the next few years.
Who replaces Rachel Reeves?
Well, Pat McFadden is always the one who is mentioned, but I mean, Pat, if anything, is even tougher than Rachel when it comes to public spending, you know. So he is an uber Blairite, so he's not going to come in and say, right, we're going to tax the rich and turn on the spending tap. So I think people might want to be careful what they wish for.
Listen, Kevin, thank you. It's been great as ever. Kevin Schofield, political editor at HuffPost UK. Thank you to him. Over to you in a couple of moments. 0344 499 1000. That question, do we have a moral duty to help our Afghan allies? We'll take more of your calls coming next on Talk.
Yeah, I mean, there's not many early morning government stats releases that makes you spit out your cornflakes, but I think this is probably one of them, because the fact that 1.3 million migrants are on universal credit is just a massive slap in the chops to many hard-working Brits, especially when you consider that the majority of them are not in work. And I think most right-minded Brits will think, why on earth are you allowed to come to this country if you cannot support yourself? Because at the moment it shouldn't be British taxpayers who are bailing you out.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Right back on it. Dan in Kent says, nothing surprises me anymore about UK governments, Ian. They are a scandal that keeps giving. Do you remember when Brexit was the most shocking thing in modern-day politics? That seems an age ago now. And small fry to the disastrous last 3 or 4 years. It's a really good point, isn't it? I mean, Brexit was like, wow, this Brexit thing is here, and it didn't go away for a while. And now you look at that and think, well, blimey, of all the other things that have happened, and I do wonder, doing this job, are we all a bit navel-gazy about this? And I'm talking about you and I, because people who tend to listen and contact shows like ours here in the afternoon are engaged in politics and read a lot about it and bother to look out the stories and form opinions. Are we just a bit consumed by it? And I don't know, the average, if I spoke to my sister, I could guarantee, and my sister is lovely, by the way, but if I said to her, what do you think about the data breach story? I promise you, I absolutely promise you, she would not know anything about the data breach story. And if I asked her in a couple of weeks' time, she'd say, I don't know anything about the data breach story. And if I asked her you know what I mean? It would just, many people are not that engaged. So maybe because we consume it all, I would include Dan in Kent on that as well. We might see it through a different prism of some kind. Let's go to your calls. Andrew is in Hertfordshire. How are you doing, Andrew?
Really good. How are you doing?
I'm as good as gold at this end, Andrew. What are your thoughts?
I think we all got worked by this announcement today. If you look at coming towards the end of the first Labour year, they wanted to get control of Parliament. So what they did was they got this pushed out there. It took the economy off the headlines. It took the inflation figures off the headlines. We're not talking about small votes.
Yeah, true.
We don't owe these people anything. You know, they were fighting for their country and we were helping them. Because of a untrustworthy, wretched North London lawyer, we were in Afghanistan in the first place. And an untrustworthy North London lawyer is now running the country. So
why was it, sorry, just out of interest, unless I lost you there, Andrew, why was it Keir Starmer's fault that we went to Afghanistan?
No, it's Blair's fault that we went there.
Oh, Blair, sorry, you're talking about Blair, right, OK, fair enough.
Yeah, so, and look what condition the country was in when Blair left, and look how good the Middle East is going since he went there as a peace envoy, and now we got a Labour Prime Minister. So the net of this is, everybody's forgotten about the winter fuel allowance, taxing jobs, the reality of what they did to the farmers, and the fact they've got no money and the unions are back. All we're talking about is they got control of Parliament and they released this, control the narrative.
OK.
So...
hang on, you say they released it to control the narrative. I mean, that would be... I mean, what are they controlling?
Well, they're stopping us talking about the other items as Parliament shuts down. So now we're all focused on this. We go...
So you're saying it's the dead cat... It's the dead cat syndrome?
Yeah, that's right. So they get control of the narrative. The reality of this is that if you're a young girl or a woman, across the channel will be hundreds of thousands of men who will claim they're a distant relative of Ian or Andrew, and they will come across, and our country has got an invasion of fighting men who've been trained by our army who don't have our values.
You are not wrong on any of that. Just a caveat, though, onto this, or an add-on, Andrew. You said at the beginning we don't owe them anything. What about the ones, let's say there's a few hundred, that were absolutely crucial to helping the British military? Do we owe those guys anything, given that we legged it from the country before anything was really sorted?
OK, if there are individual cases that you want to stand up for and the British Army, underpinned by Blair's money, will stand up for, then OK. They commit one criminal offence, and it's only them that are coming in, the males. They come here, they work, and they go back. The women, the Taliban don't value women. Why are we bringing them over here? They should stay there and rise up and overtake the Taliban. That's what they should do.
All right, Andrew, on that. It's powerful stuff. And do you know what? Every now and again, we take a call like that, and you just know that there'll be... And in fact, our first guest, or one of our first guests that we had on right at the beginning, Councillor John Edwards, made the point that whenever you say certain things, the left-wing meerkats, their heads go up and their eyes widen and they start salivating and discombobulate. Can't believe someone has a different opinion to them, and because it involves things like immigration or cohesion or race or religion or any of that stuff, they just lose their mind and they become totally insane and start saying things like, "You must be a racist." Sometimes the reality is the reality, right? I mean, there are some irredeemables in this, and you have to look at it and say, yeah, these are genuine questions. That anyway, somebody says you're going to bring into this country 30,000 Afghan men, if that were the case. At what point would you say that at the very least this does not warrant the most thorough and the deepest set of security checks that any country could possibly mount, bearing in mind where they've come from? Now, you can look at the stats, and I keep seeing that stat online that says, you know, that Afghans are top of the list for foreign sex offenders in this country. Now, that in itself does not libel every single Afghan person. But what kind of lousy, inept country would you be if you didn't kind of factor that in? You owe the next potential victim at least the courtesy of saying, do you know what, you're going to be checked out of flipping existence, mate. You want to come here? They're so thorough, the checks, you might have to do a year in Strangeways before we can be sure. And you're coming from a country that is a hotbed of all manner of nefarious, lethal activity, not least that it's run by an international terrorist organisation. I mean, good Lord, how much evidence does somebody need? And I know that's going to be tricky for the people that were genuine. I mean, those that worked as interpreters or assisted with medics, and the terrain and the culture were probably the creme de la creme of the Afghan communities in those areas. Probably the brightest and the most educated of those areas. Yeah, they're absolutely the people I want to help. But distinguishing those people from every other one that goes, yeah, I was also there as well. He was my uncle. He was the translator, and the Taliban now hate me. George is in Dundee. What have you got for us, George? Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Ian. Thanks for listening to my gripes again.
That's pleasure. Pleasure, George. My day is not complete without it.
You're asking if we've got a moral obligation.
Yeah.
No, for me. Compassion has left the building about 5 years ago. Mm-hmm. If you'd asked me 5 years ago, I think you'd be getting a different answer now. Yeah. But I just don't care about these people now. People from hellholes of countries who have let religious fanatics, death cults, take over their country, and now we're having to deal with the consequences of it. I'm sick of it. And the second point is, what gives the elite, the Ministry of Defence and the politicians promise up to 100,000 people that they can get settlement here? I'll tell you why they promise that, Ian. Because it doesn't affect their lives. It doesn't affect them getting doctor's appointment. It doesn't affect them getting dentist appointment. It doesn't affect them getting on the housing ladder. It doesn't affect their children getting schools when they've got to have a teacher interpreting in 4 different languages. This country is a joke, and I'll say again, it's going belly up.
Belly up. On that point, George, you did it brilliantly and nice and succinctly as well, just as we like it. Thank you to him. Over to you again, 0344 499 1000. We are going to look at that free speech story in just a moment as well. Brits fearing it's under threat. Can't speak your mind. You will get somebody go, yeah, but that man that said speech is under threat, he came on the radio and said his thing, so it's not. Yeah, that's not really the litmus test for the argument, by the way, that you can anonymously come on the radio and say stuff is not quite the same as feeling relaxed about putting something on a WhatsApp group or on social media, just in case the girls and boys in blue show up because somebody complained. We'll have more comment in a couple of moments. 0344 499 1000.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk. George from Luton says, oh no, I did read George's, his most polite and wonderfully written text. This from Shan in Cardiff, a super injunction to keep this quiet to protect Afghans, but they were happy to release the names of Soldier X and firearms officer involved in the death of Chris Carber. They didn't care about their safety. Governments just don't care about their own. It's a great analogy as well. You measure the hullabaloo around all of that. We need to know the officer. One here from Ellie. At the peak, 2010, Britain had around 10,000 servicemen in Afghanistan. How come there were 30,000 translators? Seems a bit odd. Well, I did wonder, which is why we asked one of our previous guests, what sort of jobs did the others do? Surely not all translators. I think some were medics and others were great on the kind of geography and stuff. But even he said, our military man that we spoke to, he talked about hundreds of people helping in Afghanistan, and yet the numbers we're looking at here are in the thousands, possibly even the tens of thousands, which sort of rather goes against what we were led to believe. 25 to 3, let's talk about free speech here. A study by Ipsos has found that Britons feel unable to speak freely on those crucial issues like race, immigration and religion due to a rising hate crime laws and self-censorship. Critics warn that Labour's policies, including this curious Islamophobia definition, but they seem absolutely hooked on. It risks silencing legitimate debate and eroding British values. Let's speak to the Associate Director at the Academy of Ideas, Alistair Donald. Alistair, good afternoon to you.
Hello, Ian.
Nice to have you with us. I mean, it's quite sad, isn't it, really? Because I was... my son asked me last night, he's 11, we were watching The Simpsons, and in this particular episode, Homer ends up in Cuba, and he asked me what communism was. And I said, we're a democracy, and, a communism is something where, the state, the government are, much more powerful, not in a good way, And I mentioned, free speech. And as I said it, I thought, wow, isn't that interesting? Because I don't think I felt as convinced by that statement as I might have done a few years ago.
I think you're not alone, probably, in that. I think increasingly people are worried about the state of free speech in this country. It's been building for some time now. And I think there's reports and research that are coming out just now, and also a whole raft of bills that have been going through Parliament in recent months, and before, to be fair, under the Conservative government, that have led us to have grave doubts as to how we can protect free speech anymore. And this Ipsos report that you mentioned is just the latest report to show people's concerns. And it's quite interesting because it shows differences in terms of different demographics and how they perceive the problem or not perceive the problem, as the case may be. It definitely shows that people who are older, who are more likely to be white, male, they seem to be the most concerned, and it draws a comparison with those people being also the most likely to want to speak out on these controversial topics. So that is a worry, because if the very people who have opinions and views and want to speak on them feel the most under threat from expressing those views, then we don't have free speech.
49% of Brits on this Ipsos survey, it seems, Alistair, believe that people are too easily offended, especially regarding race, religion and immigration issues. So there's a lot of self-censoring happening, putting the handbrake on, even just by raising the issue, I think. Not that you're about to say something horrendous about another race, just by engaging or initiating a discussion on it, there is that sense of, oh my God, am I allowed to go here anymore? I mean, that's not what our forefathers envisaged.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I don't know if you remember the case, 2-3 months ago, of Julian Fawkes, who was the retired special commissioner constable in Kent.
Yes, yeah.
tweeted about as a response to a pro-Palestinian point of view, and before he knew it, he had the police on the door in his house, actually having a rake around and commenting on the fact that he was a Brexiteer and that he read the Spectator magazine, I think, if I remember rightly.
Yes, that's right. That bastion of right-wing filth. This is the Spectator.
Absolutely, 200 years.
Indeed, of good journalism, all down the drain by one copper.
He was in his early 70s, and probably indicative of some of the types of people this research is pointed to as feeling under threat. And of course, if he's held up as an example of a problem, then why wouldn't people in a similar position to him?
And if I remember rightly, Alistair, his tweet actually was the opposite to what they thought it was. So it wasn't even accurate that they'd gone in there and thought this guy was some kind of anti-Semite who was saying something about piling into the country or something at Heathrow or whatever it was. When in fact he was sort of trying to, in a funny way, make the very opposite point. So that shows you how bad it is, that you've only got to say a certain set of words and another group of people will decide what they think it means without even bothering to really thoroughly check it.
Yes, I think that's right. And in many ways, as much as the problem is an institutional one of the police being willing to take that step into this guy's house and to argue the toss over what he chooses to express on Twitter, perhaps even the more disturbing thing is that it leaves people not knowing where they stand in terms of that they want to express. So things can seem very arbitrary. You don't quite know, when are you overstepping the boundary? When are you within the boundary? I mean, I believe anyway that there shouldn't be any boundaries in these things. But the very introduction of these restrictions leaves people, I think, worried as to what it is that they're going to express. There was also just as an example, another example of how arbitrary this can be, the case of Brian Leach a few years ago, who was the guy up in Yorkshire who worked for Asda, who put on Facebook a Billy Connolly clip that ripped into Christianity and Islam, and he found himself sacked from work. So these are, you can quite understand why the results of this Ipsos survey are exactly as they are.
Indeed, and the one that forever haunts me, and we can look at the ones that are just so ridiculous they're almost funny, although they're not really funny, but you take my point. But then the Batley school teacher, which was so horrendous that not only did this guy who now lives under a different name, having to move his entire family. But here you had a guy that showed a cartoon of the Prophet Muhammad. You had these group of people outside the school calling for him to be fired and jailed, and I'm sure there were some who wanted him killed. Very incandescent parents. A copper should have been stood there on a big loud hailer on top of a police van saying, right, all of you lot, if you don't get out, we're going to water cannon you, and if you say any more of that, we're going to put you in jail, because this teacher's done nothing wrong. But it went the other way. So any teacher now is terrified because, wow, what might happen if the braying masses come out?
Yeah, I mean, this survey that Ipsos has done was published for the Commission for Countering Extremism. And you wonder which extremism is being countered, because it seems very one-sided. That teacher, 4 years later, is still in hiding. He's still not been seen. So it's certainly not countering the type of extremist behaviour that forces him into hiding. So there's a very partisan, one-sided view to the free speech issue, which suggests that it's okay for those that hold the correct views as defined by endless bits of government legislation and policy, but not okay for those that want to challenge these issues, and that's a real problem.
Yeah, indeed. Well, we'll watch with interest. This debate certainly isn't going away. Alistair, great to have you on. Thank you for that. Alistair Donald, who is the Associate Director at the Academy of Ideas. I can't get this John Turode thing out of my head. The MasterChef fella, the Aussie guy. I don't know what, nobody knows what it was that he apparently said that he has no memory of saying in, was it 2018? Or something, so it's like 7 years ago. But he's lost his job, and presumably, because of the damning nature of the headline, he made a racist remark. probably lost his career. Now, I'm sure he's worth a few quid. He's not going to starve. But right now, I don't imagine that's the main thing that he's considering. So there it was, all focused on Greg Wallace. They do a big investigation, and at some point somebody goes, yeah, I remember we were at a party in a bar and Tarode, he started doing that Chinese eye thing, or whatever it was. I don't know. Was it that? Did he do a Pakistani accent? I mean, if he went as far as... Look, no one's defending somebody who said something racist. That's just a given. Unfortunately, I sort of have to say that, because somebody listening will go, so yeah, you're all right with racism, are you then, Colin? No, that's a given. So the idea that he's lost his livelihood, something he doesn't remember doing 7 years ago, never came up before then, by the way. If you go to, and this is the problem with these kind of investigations, I worked somewhere once where something like this happened to a guy who was in a senior position, where you get, essentially the company invites everyone that's ever worked with anyone to all come together and write down, have you seen anything that was like off colour, could have been seen as sexist, homophobic, religious hatred? Do you remember this man saying something really bad? I remember working with Collins once, and he suggested people having babies and popping them out like a Pez machine. See our previous caller for details. Yeah, that was a little bit... Is that a bit sexist? Is it a bit Pezist? I don't know what it is. Sounds like something ist. But anyone can find... when this fellow that I work with, there were people who just didn't get a promotion that found, I was unfairly treated. I could tell by the way he looked at me. He didn't like me, so I didn't get any promotion. I wanted to fill in on the drive time show, and I was never, ever asked. Yeah, but you with the work experience? Yeah, so what? Well, because you with the work... That's why. No, he just didn't like me. No, you with the work experience, man. That's why you didn't get a prime gig on... There were all of this kind of stuff. It was absolutely nonsense. If you throw that out there enough, you only need one comment, and as it turns out with the John Tarode thing, it was just one comment that did him. I don't know. Did he use the M-word? Did a black guy walk into the bar and he went, oi, and then use that word? In which case, fire him out of a flipping cannon. But I got a funny sense that it probably isn't that. And I have no evidence for that. It doesn't feel like it would have been that, because I would imagine other people. That would have been so overt and offensive. Like a load of people, somebody at the time would have collared that. And so whatever it was. And then you get into the territory. Let's assume, somebody does an off-colour accent, which I know should be allowed these days, because we've got to that stage where, you don't mean anything just by impersonating an accent. Like if you do a French accent, that's fine. If I were to sit here now and try and do a Jamaican accent, it'd look a bit iffy, wouldn't it? Be a bit Jim Davidson. So I kind of get that. But I don't know if it was something like that. Is that career ending? Or would that be better to take somebody to one side and say, mate, I know you were trying to tell a joke and you thought you were confident that you were in company of people that they'd understand where it came from. Like Ricky Gervais does, some stuff that if you looked at it from one angle, he's doing all that trans stuff, all that gay stuff, man alive. But that's not where he's coming from. And that's the kind of crucial bit. So if Tarode was in that territory, then you shouldn't be losing a career. If he was just standing there, acting like Eugene Terre Blanche, get rid of the bloke. But I don't sense it was that. Back to your calls. This is Mark in Lincolnshire. How you doing, Mark?
Hi there, Ian. Yeah, not so bad yourself, mate?
Yeah, good. What are your thoughts on this Afghan story?
Oh, yeah. It's fantastic, isn't it? I mean, basically, first thing I wanted to say about it, actually, on a kind of lighter note, but actually quite serious when you think about it. Keith Sanders always on about smashing the gangs, isn't he?
Yeah, loves a smash.
I can point him in the right direction. He should start in Westminster, because it turns out our own government are like one of the biggest people smugglers in the world. So,
yeah,
have a good look around there, Key. You might come across something.
Yeah, good point.
So yeah, I mean, on the actual thing itself, I mean, my problem with it is, what's the vetting? I mean, from the reports I've seen, like some of the articles I've seen, I think Telegraph mentioned this. Some of these people had previously been refused entry to the UK.
Yes, I read that too.
Yeah, and now they've been given entry. You know, and it's always this argument that I have. Whenever they talk about immigration, especially something related to this, you know, Afghan or Ukraine or wherever it is, it's always we assess the risk, right? Like their risk, basically. What risk are they in? In other words, this thing's leaked, so they are now at risk because they were on a list or whatever. I get that. I can see why they may have some extra risk. However, they never ever seem to give two stuffs about our risk. What is the risk to the British people?
Well, indeed, for lots of reasons, whether it's literal, as in physical or something like that, or whether it's just social cohesion going out the window, whether it's taxpayer-funded existence in hotels, which far exceeds the lifestyle of others that live alongside in poor housing and terrible conditions.
Yeah. I mean, it's whether, like you say, and you know, whether that's from a crime angle, whether it's from a societal issue, you know, that kind of stuff. That's never taken into account.
No.
Because, just bring them all in. You know
there's
what I mean?
the government have said there's 4,500 Afghans that have come to the UK. Now, that's their number, so you can probably assume it's more. And they claim that a total, so there's going to be more coming on the resettlement scheme, 6,900 expected. And again, probably more. So it's not an insignificant amount of people.
Well, the other issue here, Ian, is this 4,500, because again, I've seen in articles, they're talking about they're the actual people that they've brought from Afghanistan directly that allegedly helped the British military.
Yeah,
and
4,500.
And in the family that they then bring, you're looking at 18,000.
Well, yes. Well, whether the 4,500 includes family or not, is that you're right. That's where it gets a little bit of a grey area. But even so, I mean, speaking to those military guys earlier when they were calling, Mark, they all said that the assistance we got was kind of, you know, hundreds of Afghans helped us. It wasn't in the thousands, so you kind of wonder where it's going. Listen, Mark, I've got to run for no other reason than time. I'm being shouted at to move on. Good call. More of that on the way. 0344 499 1000.
And it's, again, actually sooner or later, a bit like we were saying with the political stuff, if you just keep on doing this, eventually it doesn't work. Sooner or later, we will get to a point where actually just throwing an anonymous allegation at somebody that they said something a bit mean or a bit fruity once upon a time, that won't work anymore, because people will go, well, as you just said, we're going to lose half our staff at this rate. It's a real shame.
It'll go full circle. I'll probably be dead, but it will definitely go full circle.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is talk.
It is talk. We're back on it. One from Mike in Lincoln. It says, "Afternoon, Ian. I keep hearing that these Afghans who've been bought over were deeply vetted and their criminal records checked. But how? Afghanistan is a failed state that, if we're all honest, doesn't have anything even resembling accurate records regarding the criminal element. Remember, men can commit assault on their wives without any kind of consequences. I mean, if you live under the Taliban and you're female, I mean, you know, forget it. Also, I swear if I hear one more MP say we have no money after they are willing to throw all my hard-earned taxes into guff like this, 7 billion quid. What's that? Almost 5 years of winter fuel allowance. What they don't seem to get is the cumulative nature of this, and I think that's what Mike's picking up on there. You know, we keep hearing we've got no money, but we've just found 7 billion quid. We've got no money, but we're able to, you know, we've got no money, but we can now placate and reverse our very own welfare bill. You know, it's like, how much more of this before somebody stands up and says, enough is enough, I'm as mad as hell, I'm not going to take it anymore. Now, Reform UK are the ones barking in the wings in this kind of territory, but even there are imperfections, I would suggest, in what is happening, certainly on immigration. And it might, Nigel Farage is probably being honest. Rupert Lowe, for example, if he was in power tomorrow, he would say, right, literally everybody who's in a hotel now, everybody who's in a hotel is going back to their home country. Literally everybody. Now, Mr Farage says you can't just do that. Now, Nigel is probably right in a kind of pragmatic sense. I don't think Nigel's saying it out of some kind of empathy for individuals. I think he's talking about the sheer magnitude of the job, that it's just not possible. Plus, I think Reform are also hoping to, you know, at least invite or seduce voters from other quarters into their fold. So there's a bit of that going on. But it's not just about immigration, it's about loads of things. Here's a bit of breaking news. Keir Starmer has suspended Labour MPs for breaches of discipline, according to party sources, denying that the move follows talks over defections to new ventures to be led by people like Jeremy Corbyn and Zara Sultana, who are setting up their own thing. Is it 3 Labour MPs, Finn, we think it might be? At least 3 MPs suspended by Keir Starmer. More on that coming. Total number was expected to be confirmed this afternoon. The move will be seen as an attempt to restore party discipline before MPs depart for Westminster for the summer holidays. They're off for a Beano in Benidorm for a few months. Let's do the voice of doom before we go back to the calls. Steve, don't go away. Very quickly, it's the mystery voice with a political angle. Who is this?
Potholes and pavements.
It's really hard. I'm not going to deny it. It's hard. Who is it?
Potholes and pavements.
You can message in if you fancy having a crack at this. 87222. We'll tell you after the news at 3 o'clock if we get a correct answer. One more time.
Potholes and pavements.
I mean, that could go on for 3 years and nobody would get it, I swear. We might start giving clues in a couple of days. We will see. Back to your calls. This is Steve in Buckingham. Steve, how you doing?
I'm all right, Ian.
Good. Nice to have you with us. You're not in Buckingham, you're in Birmingham.
I'm in Buckingham.
Oh, you're in Buckingham,
Outside.
right? Okay.
I am.
In Birmingham, in Buckingham.
My accent is a little bit.
No, I was looking at somebody calling from Birmingham, but it wasn't you.
Oh,
so it was flashing at me. So anyway, nice to have you with us, Steve. What would you like to say?
Yeah. What I'd like to know is where did he get this figure of 7 billion?
I don't know.
40,000 people. With my I used my phone, put on a calculator.
Yeah.
And it either worked out to be 7 billion between 40,000 people was either 175,000 each or 57,000. How? I'm just wondering. It's just.
What is it? Yeah. Where does that come from?
Get it from?
Is that taking it? I don't know this. I'm just like you. I'm also just taking a guess on this, Steve. Is that like a lifetime worth of accommodation? Is it that? Because it can't cost 150,000 quid a person.
Well, exactly. Does that mean? I mean, you know, without being seem to be anyway, you know, I go to London now and again to work, and it seems to me is a lot of these people, you know, and the men who wear dresses, they actually don't do anything, they just wander around all day. So I don't know. I mean, are they going to come here and work?
Well, I mean, look, if you were part of the educated set of Afghanistan that were working with the military on important details of intelligence and translation, you're probably quite an intelligent person. I get that, and maybe they're exactly the kind of people we want to help. I just can't imagine there's 40,000 of them.
Well, I was watching your programme. If there was 10,000 British servicemen there, how come it can't be? It must be 40,000, including all their aunties and uncles.
Well, indeed. I mean, at the moment, the Department of the Ministry of Defence are saying 6,900 in total are expected. So it won't be 40,000. But, you know, with these numbers floating around, it's flipping hard to keep a track of it. And even with the 6,900, I tell you what, Steve, it makes your calculator, it'll blow up if you put that figure in there, because divide that by 7 billion and see what you get. Listen, Steve, the news is upon us. Thank you for that. More calls on the way. 0344 499 1000. We have the voice of doom. I'm sensing we have a winner. I don't know why, I'm just sensing we have a winner. Have a listen to the voice.
Potholes and pavements.
Who's that? If you think you know, 87222. Right after the headlines, we shall reveal all, if we have a winner. Right now, 3 o'clock, let's get the latest news here on Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is 3 minutes after 3 o'clock. Welcome back. It is the home of Common Sense. We are discussing a big thread on the programme, that MOD story found to be responsible for a data leak that has potentially put 100,000 Afghans at risk of death. There are thousands affected being brought to the UK, billions of taxpayer money earmarked to handle the crisis. What does this say about government ineptitude? I mean, it's off the scale. The question as well we're throwing out there, do we have a moral duty to help Afghan allies? And how do we define who is an ally and who might be trying it on a tad. We'll look at that with more of your calls coming up. Also this afternoon, universal credit in chaos as nearly half of claimants don't work and over 500,000 foreigners are claiming benefits. We've got asylum seekers in taxpayer-funded hotels working illegally, Labour blocking reforms and the Home Office staying absolutely silent. Wow, what a great picture of our country we have at the moment. And as we've been discussing, free speech under attack. Nearly half of Brits feel unable to speak freely on race, immigration or religion. Critics warning that Labour's policies, including this curious Islamophobia definition, risk silencing debate and eroding British values. And importantly, we're taking your calls on the way. 0344 499 1000. We'll come back to some of your messages in just a second. Let's just do the voice of... Should we do the voice of doom payoff now? Do you want to... Yeah, should we go for it? Have we got a winner? I said I think we're going to get a winner. Have a listen. Have a listen to the voice. Here it...
Potholes and pavements.
Can we hear that again, Amy?
Potholes and pavements.
Potholes and pavements. These are some of the guesses. Ellie Chowns, no. Therese Coffey, no. Nicola Sturgeon, God, remember her? No. Andrea Jenkins, no. Daisy Cooper, no. In fact, despite my enthusiasm for this amazing radio feature, we don't have a winner. It rolls over for day four tomorrow. Will it beat the record of 21 or 23 days? Something like that. Find out as it returns at around about 2:45 on the programme. Now, Britain's universal credit system is in chaos. Nearly half of claimants not required to work, over 500,000 foreigners on benefit. Meanwhile, as I said at the beginning, asylum seekers staying in taxpayer-funded hotels. We had a counsellor on earlier whose work as a counsellor has involved a lot of trying to highlight this issue. Labour blocking reforms, the Home Office refusing to act. My goodness, let's speak to the investigative journalist David Shipley on this, who's written a piece on this very point. David, good afternoon to you. It's only when you read it out like that, that's only part of a list, I mean, it could go on and on. You think, is this the 21st century? This might be something you would be thinking could have happened before we were civilised, or before we had computer systems, or forward-thinking people. We've gone backwards.
I think we have in lots of ways. I think the British state that we live in now is much less functional than it was 10 or 20 or 30 years ago. Lots of things just don't work. The benefit system is clearly just a disastrous machine for handing money to people and not helping people get back to work, not helping people improve their lives. And the fact that we're paying away a fortune to people who aren't even British nationals, is bizarre. And I think we have a system where we've become almost pathologically concerned with caring for strangers, and we've forgotten that we actually have to look after our own country and our own people first.
Indeed, and at what point did that become a terrible thing to say? Because that seems to be what happens. We spoke to a counsellor earlier on, and interestingly, one of the areas that he'd been kind of focusing on, this councillor John Edwards, from independent councillor from Bracknell, was the Afghan resettlement scheme. This was couple of weeks he'd been literally talking about it, and now this happened, which kind of rather sort of proved his point. And he was simply making the argument that he had no problem with helping people who desperately needed help, but the level of assistance that was being given to some of these guys that were staying in hotels were far exceeded anything that many of his own constituents get in terms of a lifestyle, in terms of a government or local government help. And his headline of all of that, his conclusion to all of that, was just simply, this is not fair. And that's it, isn't it? It's not fair.
It's not fair. Also, it's not sensible. I mean, I'd go further than him. I think I would say I do have a problem with this idea that our duty is to care for everyone across the world who needs our help. We are not. We're not an incredibly rich country that can afford that. Sure. And actually, there are so many issues we have domestically in terms of people struggling, house prices, like economic growth is flatlining. The idea that our duty is to care for others, and that's what we have to focus on, is crazy, I think. And you see it in this stuff about the Afghan scandal. The state seems to have decided that actually it has a duty to care for all these people from Afghanistan, whether or not they really work for us or not, whatever kinds of people they might be, simply out of some sense of obligation. And actually, at the cost of that is a huge cost to British residents, British nationals.
100%. It's almost a go-to instinctive government response goes across the parties as well. Oh, yeah, we can do that. We'll help with that. It's like, yeah, there's quite a lot of implications in doing that. I mean, there's obviously economic implications, there's cultural, social cohesion implications as well.
Absolutely, and I think the cost that's been put on this Afghan scheme is £7 billion. And as I understand it, that's really just for relocating people here.
Yeah.
The lifetime cost when the average Afghan family has 5 people in it, so these guys are coming over with 4 or 5 dependents, is going to be vast, particularly given the low typical rates of employment, the low levels of economic activity, and the high levels of criminality, particularly sexual violence we see in Afghan men who've come here. So there's a huge amount of harm that comes from this, but the attitude seems to be, it doesn't matter, the British people can suffer a bit, as long as we can feel like we're doing what we are doing good.
And it's interesting because I mentioned this earlier. At what point? I mean, there's a sort of graph out at the moment, and it's authenticated that shows that by nationality, sex offenders by nationality, and Afghan men are at the top of the list, way disproportionate to other nationalities. Now, there could be lots of reasons for that, but just park those for 1 second. The fact is, they are at the top of the list. I mean, whatever however, or what's in somebody that makes them more likely to commit a crime. You could talk about cultural issues, which I'm sure are probably the biggest component in the pie chart on this. Perhaps, simply that by dint of a lack of education, all of these issues, whatever they happen to be, it doesn't really matter in some respects. If they're at the top of the list, then that deserves some scrutiny, right? I mean, somebody should say, hang on, you're bringing in thousands of people from Afghanistan, while simultaneously we can see this is the particular group that are more likely to commit sexual offences against women in this country than any other group. At what point does a government not think it's their responsibility to join the dots on that?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think it doesn't really matter why, whether it's some innate quality or it's just a function of men having grown up in a society where women are treated appallingly. The reality is, we know that by bringing in thousands and thousands of young Afghan men, we are creating more instances of sexual assault and rape in this country. And I think it's clear by the way it behaves that the British state prefers to care for foreign men as opposed to caring for British women. And that is appalling.
I mean, it really is. And when the council that we spoke to earlier sort of listed what happens if you get put into, and these were sort of smaller groups than some of the channel migrants that were coming over. So they were sitting in 4-star hotels, and they were obviously getting nicely looked after. It was warm, it was comfortable. There were 3 meals a day. There was no mould on the ceiling. There was no windows that were leaky in the winter. They were able to get, it's not private healthcare, but it's within the NHS, but sits outside the NHS system, where a medical team will come to you if you need some kind of assistance. It's way more than the average person. I mean, that's just not okay.
It's not, and I think there's this across the British state. We see it with all these stories. This almost pathological preference for the outsider. There's a story I had out in the Times today where I looked at this as well. So obviously there's been a lot of news about Deliveroo and other delivery companies apparently having illegal workers working for them. And it turned out that Deliveroo had actually turned around to the Home Office and said, look, if you give us the locations of asylum seeker hotels, we'll be able to identify accounts that are operating from those locations and block them. Simple technical solution to stop this illegal working. And the Home Office said, no, we couldn't possibly do that because it might put the asylum seekers at risk. It might be a safety risk for them.
Right.
And there's this, again and again, you see this approach where the most important thing is caring for people from somewhere else. And the first duty of a state should be to care for its own citizens and its own people.
You would think so.
Well, it should be. The British state is failing at that very clearly.
In so many areas that we discuss. I mean, this has tentacles in all sorts of aspects of our life. And we mentioned at the beginning there about universal credit. And, it's failing its own people on this one as well. 3.6 million people are exempt from work. Now, I'm not a clinician. I can't, conjure up the specific numbers. And if somebody, doesn't have any legs or they've got a horrendous mental health issue, I'm the first to say that's exactly where I want my tax money to go. I'm fine with that. I just do struggle that there's 3.6 million people who are exempt from going to work. They're not forced to look for work in any shape or form. And whilst understanding that some people will be in that position, 3.6 million.
Yeah, it's very high.
It's massive.
And I think if you look at the numbers since COVID, the rates of disability have shot up. And it looks a bit in some ways like the 80s, where under Thatcher, the government essentially tried to hide how bad unemployment was by moving a lot of people onto sickness benefit. And I think there's lots of efforts here to sort of hide how bad our economy is, you know. And in some ways, it's maybe easier for the government to say these people are unwell than to try to do something about it. And no one thinks that people who are genuinely disabled shouldn't be should be made to work. But actually, a lot of people probably would benefit from having something purposeful to do in their lives.
You think so?
Yeah, it's almost like, putting people in prison where they have nothing to do, leaving people at home all day with no purpose and no work can actually be really negative for them.
Yeah. I wonder if it is that. Is it the fact that it's easier for governments to do? It's often said the only thing worse than some idle character with a gyro in his hand is an idle character without a gyro in his hand. That's a greater headache for the state. So pay some money, because it makes something go away, and I is the kind of path of least resistance for the state in many respects.
Yeah, I think so. It's like the Afghan thing, where rather than thinking about the problem and trying to solve it a different way, the state just threw £7 billion at bringing tens of thousands of Afghans over here, and there does seem to be a kind of laziness in the way the civil service and the state generally makes decisions.
And you wonder about the calibre of politicians sometimes, don't you, when you look at, and I know depending on where people sit politically depends on what they sort of project onto their kind of heroes or villains in Westminster, but when you look across it, and I look at the front bench, it concerns me there's very little, if not any, business experience in the cabinet. I find that almost criminal that would be the case, but I can't see experience in many other places either, for that matter. So, and that to me is a problem. And I look across, and also in both parties, both main parties, and you think, where these are literally these people are making multi-billion-pound decisions, and they are hopeless. And that's not just a cheap point. I think our proportion of hopeless MPs is probably at an all-time high.
I think so as well. And I think it was very obvious today at Prime Minister's questions. No one brought up the issue of the Afghan cover-up.
Yeah.
No one. There were sort of questions about all sorts of other things, but no one actually addressed the most significant issue facing the country in the news today. And I think that speaks to a real lack of quality and lack of seriousness in our Parliament.
What do we need? Do we need some kind of, revolution? I don't mean people taking to the streets. I mean a revolution within, how we do politics, our system, the checks and balances, just heady levels of ineptitude that snake their way around all departments, local government as well as national government.
Yeah, I think in light of the Afghan scandal, where let's remember what the British state has done is decide to embrace a policy which is going to bring over 100,000 Afghans here, and it decided to lie about it. It hid the fact that it spent the money, it hid that money from the public accounts, it hid that money from the bond markets, it then also hid those numbers from the immigration figures. There was a huge concerted attempt to deceive Parliament, the British people, the media about this policy. It was done completely undemocratically. And I think it's very hard to see that a state which behaves in that way has any kind of democratic legitimacy. And I do believe what we need to do is establish a new way of running this country. I think it has to come through a democratic revolution. I think we need to look at the civil service itself, which is the consistent bit that runs between the governments. The Afghan scandal happened under the Tories and Labour, but the civil servants are the same, and I think the civil service is hugely to blame. We need a new settlement, I think, and a new way of running things in this country, which actually serves the needs of the people, not the desires of politicians and civil servants to feel good about themselves.
I think there's that phrase groupthink just seems to spring up time and time again, certainly in my mind, in all sorts of areas, in global initiatives, but domestic ones. Well, this is how we've always done it. And because there's a lot of people in government that aren't very intelligent, and I don't mean they haven't got a degree, I mean just genuinely not really intelligent, nuts and bolts intelligent. Things don't get challenged. They wouldn't know how to challenge it. The civil service want an easy life. They like the status quo. They've got their nice pensions, and they hang around doing what they have to do. And this pervasive groupthink way of functioning just seems to be there all the time. Every story that I look at some point, I open a door, a metaphoric door, and I see the words groupthink in neon lights. And that's how it rolls. Oh, this is how we do it. This is how we've always done it. There's no real challenge, no desire, no thirst to change the system and you know, somehow attempt to improve the very things that we talk about on a regular basis.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, if you look at the British state, there's almost no part of it which works now, and I think a huge reason for that is the groupthink in the civil service. Part of the reason, I think, is general intelligence, but also bureaucracies don't tend to reward people who are independent thinkers. Yeah. Bureaucracies like people who just go along and run the process. So I think as we redesign the British state for the future, we need to find a way to create a system which rewards independent thinking, which rewards success and actually punishes failure. And that's the other big effect. There's no, you know, apparently no one's even been sacked or disciplined for emailing out these records to a bunch of people
to another
Afghanistan.
department, apparently.
Yes, and that's so common. If you look at anything in the civil service, people who fail are moved sideways, moved upwards sometimes. There is no real consequence for failure. And so, of course, these departments become full of, you know, people who are bad at their jobs if you never get removed.
You have to, so somebody said you have to almost commit second-degree murder to lose your job in the civil service. And I've heard some just unbelievable tales of people who've been very naughty at work. When I say naughty, I mean whether it's alcohol-related or whatever, essentially just not doing their job. And they've gone through every process that in the commercial world you'd just be told, you know, thank you, mate, you know, your time's up. But over there, the civil service, it's like, no, well, we'll just find another job for Bert. You know, unfortunately, he was caught doing, you know, that in the library. So, but don't worry, because Bert's, he's got a drink problem. He's got a drink problem. This is a very real story, by the way. So we'll move him somewhere else. So Bert gets moved somewhere else, and he just drank somewhere else and did whatever else he was doing somewhere else and looking at stuff he shouldn't be looking at. And they couldn't fire this guy. And it's like, well, what point can you not? He's got a mental health issue. Well, no, he hasn't got a mental health issue. He just likes, you know, for some reason, drinking a lot and self-abuse in public corridors.
Yeah.
I mean, it's things like that.
It is, and I think anyone who does any kind of investigating into the civil service, you encounter these stories where people have done things like that, you know, even acts of apparent corruption, and they just stay in the organisation. And it's the result after decades of that is you just get departments staffed with people who are not good at their jobs.
Yeah. Absolutely. And then somebody rises to the top, don't they? And then that the problem's then compounded because somebody who wasn't very good in the first place becomes the boss of that department or the line manager. And that sort of Peter Principle thing kicks in, you know, and you have very sort of inadequate, very mediocrity reigns supreme over there at the civil service, but it suits everyone, so nobody does anything about it.
I think so, and of course, if people have risen up despite their failures, they have a strong incentive to keep those failures quiet.
Yeah, of course.
And I think that culture of covering up,
you
see it, an extreme example of this Afghanistan thing, but lots of failures in the civil service are covered up all the time, and often as a journalist, when I go to challenge press desks about this stuff, they're most interested in, you know, who's leaked it, who's provided the information, rather than recognising that they're at fault. And it's something they need to do to improve things.
Because there's so many people with, it seems, there's sort of this thread of inadequacy that threads itself through the system. I suppose nobody blows the whistle, really, on the inadequacy because they've got their own inadequacies. So it's a sort of almost a kind of, it's kind of a satirical sketch from the 60s that you can imagine David Frost writing, you know, back in the day. It's got that all over it, isn't it? Oh, I don't report on him because he might report on me. It's got that all over it.
Oh, gosh, absolutely. And you see it as well often with outsourcing, that people who've worked in the government department then go to run the outsourced entity and they're supervised by the guy who used to work for them within the civil service, and everyone knows each other. These relationships are impossibly cosy and often, you know, functionally, if not literally corrupt. The whole system is just failed. And I think in terms of politics, hopefully, you know, now we're all starting to realise how bad it is. I believe and hope that actually good people will realise they have to get involved in politics, because otherwise we're not going to fix this.
A little bit of breaking news just come in. We understand so far at least 3 MPs have lost the whip. This is the Labour whip, with others reported to be meeting with party whips at the moment. The 3 suspended MPs are understood to be Brian Leishman, Scottish politician, Alloa and Grangemouth, Chris Hinchcliffe and Neil Duncan Jordan. Which sounds like a Tory MP tribute act, doesn't it? Neil Duncan Jordan, who's a Labour MP. So, yeah, they've apparently been seen not to have adhered to party regulations.
Do we know what for? Or
I think it's connected to the Jeremy Corbyn Sultana kind of.
Oh, this is the thing.
But we don't fully know what the details are.
We know that Corbyn, of course, was furious that Sultana went too early with the announcement, don't we?
That's right. Yes, I mean that's proper kind of Animal Farm territory, isn't it? You know, we're all in it together. You know, it's like no, I'm more powerful than you.
I'm the bigger comrade, not you.
Absolutely,
that sort of stuff,
yeah, all of that. It's how it always ends in that kind of
absolutely
that sort of thinking. Listen, David, great to have you on with us again. Good to see you, David Shipley, the investigative journalist, with us on the programme. Back to you in a couple of moments. 0344 499 1000.
Well, it's not merely that there's not much equivalence, it's also that there wasn't an investigation into John Road. And if I were him, I'd be talking to my lawyers very quickly indeed, because he has been hung out to dry for basically no reason whatsoever. Someone said he said something nasty at a party. I don't know if there's corroborating evidence. It wasn't even him that they were looking into. It's in my opinion, mismanagement again by the BBC.
And it's, again, actually...
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
So we'll give you more details on those suspended Labour MPs. They've lost the whip. A party source did tell The Times that the suspensions were due to persistent breaches of party discipline. So what that means in reality, we can only wonder and wait to hear. Loads of comment from you. This from Ian in York. The Taliban had the information from the get-go, but the government started moving these Afghans about a year ago after the names were accidentally leaked. We're also told that reprisals would have happened immediately. So why didn't the Taliban take revenge immediately or within the year? Doesn't make sense. This in from Ian, somewhere in Wales, who says the linguistic legend. I don't know if that's a compliment or not. Also known as Ian Collins. If the government can only manage to process one asylum seeker per week, how can they manage to thoroughly vet thousands of Afghan soldiers in 2 years? It's a great point, Ian. I don't know. and nobody else knows. But it's like we were talking with David, our last guest. It's just breathtaking, jaw-dropping levels of incompetence that is flooding. It's a tsunami out of Westminster at the moment. We're broken, we're knackered. And you look at the people in charge and it's horrifying. You almost have to kind of look behind a cushion, because if you look too long like a gorgon, you'll turn to some kind of stone. Grace is down in London. What have you got for us, Grace? Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Yeah, I think it's a very interesting question about whether we have a moral duty, because it seems to me that people define moral in increasingly divergent ways. And some philosophers ask, where do moral absolutes come from in the first place? Philosophers sometimes ask, we know, for example, that rape is wrong, but how do we know that? Where does that come from? Especially if we're just atoms, where does that come from? Are there moral absolutes? And I think that in this country, or maybe in Western society more broadly, we're having a real shift in what we consider to be moral. I'm seeing quite a few people of my generation seemingly thinking that it's a moral good to strive first and foremost for what one wants, which is in complete contrast to what I think is a moral good, which is to put other people first so far as you can. Now, we talk about this being a Christian country. Actually, being a Christian isn't about behavioural or rules. It's about choosing personally to follow Christ, and each person must choose themselves and make their own decision about that. But his teachings have shaped what we thought of as moral in this society. If you look back at history, that's where some of our moral ideas came from. But I think that we're abandoning those. If we want to claim that we are a Christian country, we do need to think about the moral teachings we were given, which are that we should care for the vulnerable. And there are people in Afghanistan who are horrifically vulnerable. It just doesn't bear thinking about, especially what some women and girls are facing.
Sure.
So to the extent to which we can help some people, I really think that we should. And, sometimes, doing the moral thing means putting up with something that we might not otherwise choose. But I think that if we have moral values, that's the right thing to do.
But how do we do, who is the sort of arbitrator here in terms of deciding what the moral value is? What is it set against? Is it an ecclesiastical directive that we're looking for? Something we can't fully define? Is it a feeling, a sense? Is it politics? What is that? Because you can say, OK, here's a fella that helped out the British military a little bit, but there's another fella over there that, well, he did a bit, but he didn't do that much. And he's also part of, a country that has a very suspicious track record when it comes to Western men, when it comes to Afghan men in Western society.
I mean, with regard to that last point, that is obviously something that a lot of people are worried about, but we should keep in mind that each person is an individual. So I think we need to look at things as much as we can on a case-by-case basis. And particularly with women and girls, some of them are at risk from some of those men. So if we can protect some of those women and girls, then we ought to be doing that. But it is a perpetually difficult question to ask, who is the arbiter? Because if we're just deciding for ourselves, or if politicians are deciding, we will keep having disagreements. So I think we need to have a real think about what we want to hold up as morally right. Because if we're just going to go for what we want, or even just say things like charity begins at home and not care about the human beings, we've lost our moral foundation. I think we need.
But can you say charity mostly begins at home, or charity disproportionately begins at home, and there could be good and sound reasons for that? Because I wonder with the morality thing, whether it's not what is absolute and unarguable in terms of the morality, it's how people project it themselves, isn't it? It's about them feeling good and the sense that they've, we've done something really good, that therefore it's the moral decision. And that becomes a really dicey area to me.
Yeah, it reminded me of an episode of Friends where they argue about whether you can do something completely selfless or whether you're just doing it to feel good about yourself.
I think the latter is probably more commonplace in scenarios like this.
But then why do we feel good about ourselves or we do good things for other people if it's only survival of the fittest, if we're just...
I don't think it's only the survival of the fittest, but I wonder, Grace, whether we kind of... because it's intertwined with whatever our politics are, right? I mean, it's a bit like, left-wing thinkers will say, give lots more money to the poor, but the right-wing will say, well, yes, but in order to do that, you have to take lots of money from the poor to give it to other poor people. There's no moral superlative in the former.
With different tax policies and such like, you're going to need to look at, the various outworkings of those things. I mean, one of the things I'm finding flipping bizarre at the moment is how some people consider themselves to be left-wing and yet support wealthy doctors getting even more money. So the terms left and right have almost lost all meaning. But I think that we need to think hard about what our moral values are and where we get them from, because if we only care about human beings because we can feel that they are like us, if we want to do good because we feel more association with them since they're nearer to us and more similar to us, that's not necessarily a logical perspective. Those little girls in Afghanistan who are at risk are just as human and valuable as little girls here. So to the extent to which we can help some of them, I really think that we ought to be considering that rather than only prioritising what we most feel like we would want to do ourselves, because ultimately that's not really a moral value, that's just feelings.
There it is, Grace. It's a great call. Thank you. There's a whole kind of philosophical angle we could follow up. Wish I was more intelligent enough to do it. But you take the point. I think we all broadly know, though, where we're at on this. And the thing about playing the moral, what is the moral thing to do? And that's such a curious. We all wheel it out. Well, it's not morally right. We use those phrases, but when you actually start to really tuck into it and do a bit of a deep dive into morality, what are you judging it by? What against? What's the litmus test? Where is it coming from? Is it an inner feeling because you will feel better? And that's great. If you do somebody an obvious favour, carry an old lady shopping is usually the kind of reach for argument, then that's a good thing to do. Is it the moral thing to do? I think moral's probably doing some heavy lifting in that phrase, more so than the shopping. But you know what I'm saying. So morality is curious, and when it starts to get kind of interlinked with left-wing versus right-wing, because the left only exists because it believes it's morally superior. It's got no other purpose in life. Other than that, it's frankly extinct. There's no intellectual purpose in left-wing thinking. It's just a bizarre and bonkers way of forming opinion. But if you throw in the moral card, you satisfy yourself that, yeah, I'm right up there. 0344 499 1000. Lots more still to come. Keep it here. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is talk. This one from Deborah. Another day, another scandal cover-up. It's time we have a general election to allow the public to vent their anger and kick this government out. The problem is, are reform ready and prepared for government? You've got to, I mean, just think about it. We've been talking about, and I absolutely support the idea, in a democracy, here's a party that has come along and there's only 5 MPs at the moment, and they are punching well above their weight. They're informing debate. They're changing the terms of debate. They certainly appear to most people to be more reflective of national gut opinion in so many areas. But you've got to find 300 of those people that can pass all the tests that we normally require when we talk about this stuff. You know, people with experience, people with a good sound, a good head, a good nose for, you know, the right way to do something. That's an awful lot of work, man alive. So it doesn't mean they can't do it. But will we end up in, as I think Deborah is alluding to, in the same place as, you know, will we just find ourselves attacking all of these guys, going, good Lord, they're bloody hopeless. Look at the new member for Ashford in Kent or whatever. It's tricky. And I wish them all the luck in the world to put that together. But it's not easy. And I know some great brains, and I know a lot of, as many of you know, I know a lot of these people personally. They are working day and night to try and make it work. But it's, you know, putting a political party together at that level, when you're no longer being seen as a protest party, but the polls are showing you as being potentially the next government. Boy, have you got your work cut out. Let's talk about this story, which feeds into all the craziness that we talk about. New Labour guidance opens the door to gender identity discussions in schools, rejecting Tory bans on teaching the broader concepts and sex education for children under 9. Now, critics warn this could expose kids to harmful material. Meanwhile, another story today. Again, nurse Sandy Peggy, remember this, she was told off because she was a bit grumpy about having to get changed from her civvies into her nurse's uniform, which means, apart from your underwear, taking your clothes off, in front of men, or men that identified as women, so men. She's won her case, thank goodness for that. NHS 5 faced a backlash for wasting $220,000 on the case. Calls grow for accountability and protection of single-sex spaces. Let's speak with Helen Dale, the writer and the lawyer. Good afternoon to you, Helen.
Good afternoon, Ian, and how are you?
I'm good. Nice to have you with us. What I find, I'm going to just repeat something that you have probably said 1,000 times, so have I. You don't meet anyone in the real world that doesn't agree with the conversation I know we're about to have and the nonsense of it all. You know, you might meet 1 or 2 characters who, you know, claim, no, I think she should have been able to get changed in a room with a man or whatever. But generally speaking, it's not a view that's that common. So where does such robust policy making come from?
Well, this is a situation that has become very serious in Scotland, because it would appear that it's kind of a competition between Scotland and California as to which is the jurisdiction that became most captured by gender identity ideology. I mean, I was in Scotland last month for a function held by the Adam Smith Museum, the Panmure House and the Canongate, in front of an audience of Scots, of course, and I used to work up there. And they were just horrified that this has happened in their country and in the home of the Scottish Enlightenment. And this is across the political spectrum. People are horrified by this.
And rightly so. And the thing about the guidance in schools, I mean, let's just start with that. What is just, you know, in any other world, it would just be a bit bonkers. But this is deadly serious, of course, because this is our kids' future and our kids' education. And I don't know why you need to have this kind of whole gender identity discussion. I don't even know why it needs to be there. It just doesn't need to be there. You know, we managed to get along quite well without it being there. There's certain things loads of things you don't learn in school. You know, loads and loads of things that school doesn't touch. Why there is this gravity towards this one is extraordinary.
Well, this, I presume, is part of what used to be called PSE, you know, relationships education, personality and something. And to be honest, I know there's this fight going on today and over the last few days, but particularly today, over this material being taught in schools. But I actually don't think it ever went away, regardless of what the government in Westminster or any other devolved government, even if they've gone in different directions at various times. Like, I couldn't imagine this changing. I don't think that this has ever gone away. I think there have been a certain percentage of schools, regardless of what anyone is saying in Westminster, that have just been continuing to teach very, very strange, pseudoscientific, this is really on par with creationism. It's an argument that people have a soul, a gendered soul, to use Helen Joyce's expression, either in addition to their biological sex or over the top of their biological sex.
Yeah.
I mean, and it's fairly clear with the Sandy Peggy Tribunal and some of the transcript which have been made available or who have been quoted by the Tribunal tweets account, which you can look at on Twitter. It's quite clear that Dr. Upton and to a degree NHS Fife, but you've now got this situation where their interests are at loggerheads with each other because the internal investigation in the hospital has cleared Sandy Peggy, and now the Employment Tribunal is still going today. But it's very clear that large numbers of these people genuinely do believe in their heart of hearts that their gender identity overrides biological sex. I mean, that's the same as saying that your mind and your body are two different things, that when your body dies, your mind continues. That's a soul.
Yeah.
It's religious belief.
Well, it's evangelical, it's madness, it's all of those things. And that's not to be unkind to somebody who decides they want to live their life. I'm sure I'm like you. I couldn't care how somebody wants to live. I just don't want to change facts. I don't want to change science. And I certainly don't want
care
governments.
if people believe in a soul. I mean, that would, if I started to go around and say you're not allowed to believe in a soul, that means every Jew, every Christian and every Muslim in this country, all three of those religions have a concept of a soul. Other religious traditions don't necessarily. I don't get to go around and tell people from those religions that they don't get to believe in a soul.
Yeah.
People are allowed to believe in gender identity ideology. I think it's bonkers. I'm an atheist when it comes to gender identity ideology. I don't have a gendered soul. But the thing is, they can't make me believe it too.
Correct.
And that's the issue here. And all of these fights over blasphemy laws, all of these that existed historically with Christianity and now with Islam, it's the same fight.
I mean,
you don't get to demand from me a particular set of religious beliefs that I don't hold. This is part of the living in a liberal society.
Yeah. For the second time today, I'm going to invoke the Monty Python kind of comparison, because in any other world, this would be a Monty Python sketch. I mean, it's that
completely
mad.
bonkers.
And again, the evangelical nature of some of those people who've stood there with protests, shouting at women for having a basic scientific view of life as it is, the facts. As if they are the TERFs, the extremists. It doesn't seem that. I remember years ago reading the word TERF. I had to look it up. I had to do some research. It was that hard to find why these people. Yes. It was the first time I'd seen somebody who'd a journalist or somebody who was speaking basic common sense and fact was assaulted by a group of people who were shouting TERF at this, where they broke the camera. Horrible situation.
I think that was an incident involving Julie Bindel.
Oh, was it Julie, was it? Oh, yeah, it could well have been.
There have been a couple of other incidents. It may
well have been, because
someone can make a telephone call to her and establish whether that was her. If it wasn't her, she will know who it was.
And she wouldn't be offended if we misattributed that to her, of course. But it might well have been Julie, because it was written as from their perspective, so quite possibly. And I remember looking up the word TERF and finding out a bit more about it, thinking, well, who are these people? And then within 5 minutes, this whole group of very sort of angry, slightly deranged people had decided. And I do wonder, I think there's a correlation here as well, Helen, sort of some extreme left-wing thinking where people are thinking, well, we've done that, the gay debate is sort of solved, and racism never going to fully go away like other forms of criminality, but we're leaps and bounds from where we were even 10 years ago. We need another enemy. I think that plays a part in all of this as well. We need another injustice. We need something to fight.
Well, the problem with all meliorist ideologies, to make the world, it's from the Latin word for honey, to make the world better, to make the world sweeter, is that they tend to construe themselves as having a telos. So you get this line of, the arc of history bends towards justice. Well, I hate to break it to you, that's actually not true. It's a lovely quote, but it's not true. But the thing is, lots of liberal-derived traditions believe that. It's part of the ideology. And they don't need to be, I'm waving my left hand, but they don't need to be left ideologies, because it exists also in classical liberalism as well, which is associated with the political right. But it's an incident of liberalism to think that we can always find new forms of liberation. We can find more people to bust out of jail and to make them free, and so on and so forth. Forgetting that both socialists and conservatives, different and not liberal traditions, are both capable of going, you've run out of road, or you've redistributed all the things you're going to redistribute, and it's not going to get any better. There are no more people to free, all of those things that come from these rival ideological traditions.
And what has been...
For a range of reasons, those traditions became very weak. They were colonised by liberalism, and so it meant that there were very, very few, because the radical feminists, this is a specific part of feminism, the radical feminists actually come out of that socialist tradition.
That's very true.
So they're a very, very specific kind of feminists. They're not just any feminists. Radical feminists are a very particular type.
And it's interesting that when it comes to those who are arguing the case that we're talking about here, the kind of views and things you've written on, Helen, it does go across party. It's very, if you take Julie Bindel, I'm thinking Julie Bindel, Rosie Duffield, J.K. Rowling, these are not right-wingers. These are people that are historically, and certainly in Julie's case, very much from the left. And so it's not a sort of, as some people write it off, some sort of extreme load of bigots. This is not the background of these
There's
people.
been an attempt in the United States, and to a lesser extent in Australia, to try to turn it into political polarisation that goes with left and right,
Doesn't work,
red and
does
blue
it?
tribe. And that is starting to come to pieces now. It's starting to come to pieces in Australia. I mean, I'm Australian originally, and there is a serious claim to be made that one of the reasons why the Greens did so poorly in the last Australian federal election is because they lost so many female members, which in Australia you need to be booth workers. Because of the compulsory voting, you need people to hand out the how to vote cards. Actually on the day, on polling day, and also for what Australians call pre-polls, you physically need warm bodies there with the little pieces of paper in your hands to talk to people, to try to persuade them, because a lot of people make their decision just as they're walking to the polling place. This is the way the Aussie system works because of the compulsory voting. And if you haven't got enough booth workers who are experienced, I've been a booth worker for a different political party in Australia, it takes quite a lot of skill, and you need a bit of practice to do it well. And if you lose those people, then you just have no one there to talk people into voting for your party. But the other big parties, the Labor Party and the Coalition, do always have people just because they're that much larger. And lots of people, Australians, have said to me, this is why the Greens did so badly. You would go to vote and there would be no Greens, but there would be a few signs, which Australians call corflutes, but there would be no booth workers. So it was over this gender identity issue. And those are Greens. These are lefties. They're lefties in Australia the same way they are here.
Interesting times. Listen, Helen, it's been fabulous having you on. Great stuff. Thank you very much, Helen Dale, the writer and the lawyer, on a couple of stories there. And again, that great news that the nurse, Sandy Peggy, has been cleared of misconduct after opposing mixed changing rooms. NHS 5 face a backlash now for wasting £250,000 worth of taxpayers' money. These people are hopeless. It goes back to what we were saying. People are pathologically nuts. 0344 499 1000. This is Talk.
The British people, via Parliament, were going to be not just misled, but directly lied to. And the costs that were suggested to the court, £7 billion. Now, there is an ancient constitutional principle that money is not raised and spent in this country without the approval of the House of Commons.
Yeah.
£7 billion is a lot of money to spend secretly without letting anybody know.
It is.
Well, it's not merely that there's not much.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
And this in from Sally, reference Grace, great caller we had on around about half an hour ago. Sally says, I listened to and understand Grace's moral argument about little girls in Afghanistan and little British girls, but in my opinion, our government has a duty and responsibility to put British kids first, simply because they are our government. It does not mean little girls in Afghanistan are less valuable. It's a matter of priorities. Our government simply cannot save the world. Thank you, Sally, for that. It's exactly that, and we sort of have this, well, there's a group of people who seem to think we can. You do a bit, you do where you can. We all give to charities. Some are domestic, some go elsewhere. The charity begins at home thing, mostly. Yeah, mostly. Don't apologise, but mostly it does, because unless you've got your own house in order, it's a very Thatcherite thing here, you're not going to be of any use to anyone else, for goodness sake. Amy is in Milton Keynes. Amy, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Ian. How are you doing?
Very good, thanks. We've not got long, but I'm sure you can do it. What do you want to say?
No worries, I'll try. I completely agree with Sally, by the way. So whenever these big philosophical or political conundrums come along, I always try and break it down and, a bit like Maggie T, try and think about the situation and how that would look like in the household.
Yeah, good point.
If you've got a household, you wear red tops, and someone with a blue top came to your house, they knock on your door, say, look, I need a glass of water, I need a shelter for the night, please can I come in? You take them in, you house them, then they go and move on and do whatever. And then you meet in your local community the next day and you're speaking to kind of like your neighbours, and they also let in a blue top, and they say, oh, well, no, they were aggressive, or they did this to my child, or they stole this from my household. So you go back home, and then another blue top comes and knocks on your door and says, please can I come in? All of a sudden, you're now thinking of all the horrible scenarios that you've heard from around your community. Your moral responsibility then lies with your grandparent that's living with you, or your sick child, or so you're hearing all these things. So I think exactly what Sally was saying, and then you said after, is your moral responsibility always begins at home. It should always be from the government's perspective.
And I think that's as near as... I'm not a religious person, but I think if I was, I reckon I'd be saying exactly that from a religious perspective. That sounds fairly... I think that's the sort of thing Jesus might have said.
Yeah. Well, to be honest,
I never met him, by the way.
Oh, that's a shame. He's a great guy. Yeah, so I'm not particularly religious, but I have read the Bible, and it's what Western culture stems from. If you want to know how and the reason why we live the way we live, and why we're so democratic, and why it's because generations grew up living by those principles. So it's a very important kind of...
Indeed. It's not as if it's not tried and tested, which is a great point. Listen, Amy, thank you for that. You get the final word this afternoon. We're having great calls on this, Jeremy Kyle.
Sorry?
I said we've had some great calls.
Sorry, I've been filming.
I know you've got to 60. I know you got to 60.
Hello?
Hello?
Hello? Why is your producer, young Finn, wearing a shirt? He's looking quite smart today, isn't he?
Do you know, he's not been very well for the last 2 days.
He doesn't look very well. What's the matter with him?
I dosed him up on strepsils.
Did you?
Yeah.
You got a sore throat, have you?
He's had too many, and he thinks he's OD'd on strepsils.
What's been the big story then? What
Strepsils has been the big story.
Strepsils have been the big story, and children's toys. That was yesterday.
Can Finn survive the strepsil?
Starmer's angry at the data breach, isn't he?
Starmer
I'm very angry.
Very angry.
Why didn't you cancel the super injunction in the last 12 months then?
Yeah, true enough.
Just so much to talk about. Starmer's just suspended 3 Labour